It is said that on certain nights, when the air over the rivers ran warm and still, the cities of ancient Mesopotamia did not sleep, they only softened. The markets fell quiet, the courtyards emptied, and the noise of the day folded itself away like a rolled scroll. Above the flat roofs and shadowed alleys, above the gardens hanging in the dark, there rose the stepped backs of the ziggurats, layered stone upon stone, like ladders reaching into a vault of breathing starlight. On one such night, long ago, a single flame moved slowly up the side of one of these stone mountains. The figure who carried it was small against the vastness of the bricks, little more than a flicker of motion, a shifting ember in the dark. Sand-colored walls breathed out the warmth of the fading day, and the wind was no more than a shy touch, stirring the edges of woven garments, lifting a hint of dust. Beneath this figure, the city was reduced to scattered points of light, a cooking fire still glowing, a lamp left burning before a household god, a guarded torch by a silent gate. Above, the sky was the true city, endless and alive, its streets written in constellations, its towers in clusters of stars. The Milky Way arched like a pale river, mirroring the dark, slow curve of the Euphrates far below. At the top of the ziggurat, in a small chamber open to the night, waited a clay tablet, a reed stylus, and a question. Somewhere in the quiet of that moment, beneath the watchful eye of the moon, a thought was drawn in the mind of the watcher. Did the heavens rule the destiny of kings, or could a patient observer, high upon these terraces of dust and stone, learn to bend the omens, to soften decrees written in light? Whispers tell us that this was not the question of a single night, nor of a single scribe. It was the breath of an entire age. Inside the small chamber at the summit, the air was cool and faintly scented with baked clay and smoke. The walls were simple, the stones rough, but the floor was carefully swept, as if to welcome something unseen. A low table of wood supported a basket of tablets, each one a world of tiny wedges pressed into fine, wet earth. By torchlight, the cuneiform lines looked like fields after rain, furrows of meaning running in patient order. The watcher set the flame in an alcove and knelt beside the waiting tablet. The reed stylus fit between their fingers like a familiar prayer. Outside, the sky leaned closer. The stars, unblinking, seemed to gather around the edges of the chamber, as if invited. It is said that in these high places, the scribes of the night did not think of themselves as rulers of numbers or keepers of secrets. They were listeners. They watched the slow procession of the heavens, with the devotion of one listening to a long, sacred chant. Each star, each wandering light, each sudden eclipse was a syllable in a language older than the first triumphant city walls. They had been taught the names of the stars, but more than that, they had been given the stories. There, a hunter. There, a lion. There, a coil like a serpent's body, circling, circling, and through it all, the path of the moon, pale and steady, marked by the moon god's soft step. Beneath the silence, there were records, scrolls and tablets filled with careful lists. Nights when the moon thickened, nights when it thinned, nights when a bright, wandering star lingered too close to another. Eclipses that darkened the sun at midday, shadows that swallowed the moon and then released it, as if some invisible mouth had taken a long, slow breath. The scribes had been warned that such signs were not to be taken lightly. They were omens, whispers from the gods, veils lifted for a heartbeat and then drawn again. Yet for all the awe, for all the fear, there was also a quiet, stubborn curiosity. If these signs could be written down, could they also be understood? We drift along the terrace, as if the centuries have thinned to nothing. We see other nights, other flames climbing these same steps. We see other hands pressing the reed into clay, recording the sky as faithfully as a riverbank records the passing flood. In forgotten corners of the storerooms below, jar after jar fills with tablets. Some bear the names of kings and wars, others bear gentler marks. The year the moon was hidden for so many breaths, the month when the red star stood in the east for 3 nights running, the day when the shadow of the earth covered the white face of the moon. They call these records omen lists, but they are also something else, a kind of mirror, a way of holding the sky in their hands for a moment, before it slips back into distance. Sacred watchers kept these lists not only to tremble before them, but to compare one night to another. They noted when disaster followed an eclipse, and when it did not. They traced subtle lines between a strange alignment and a king's illness, between a wandering star and flood or drought. Each connection was not a certainty, but a possibility, a whisper in the chamber of the mind. Slowly, patterns began to appear. They noticed that certain eclipses returned in cycles, like echoes across time. They noticed that wandering stars, what we now call planets, followed loops, not chaos. They saw that the sky, for all its mystery, did not behave like a storm of chance, but like a great, solemn dance, whose steps could be anticipated if one was patient enough to watch. It is said that a city once stood on the brink of war when a shadow ate the sun. Fear spread like dust in a storm. Yet the scribes, their tablets worn from use, had seen such a shadow before. They knew it would pass. They advised calm, ritual offerings, quiet waiting. The day darkened, and the city held its breath. Then light returned. Was it because they had read the signs correctly, or because the sky would have done as it wished regardless? For the people standing in the courtyards, it did not matter. They had been given a way to walk through fear. Now, in this chapter of the night, we drift deeper into the inner rooms, where the rulers themselves came to listen. Imagine a king, robed and crowned, sitting upon a low throne in a dim hall. The oil lamps sway gently, breathing shadows across the walls. Before him stand the learned scribes, tablets in hand, their faces calm, their eyes lowered in respect but not in terror. They have, after all, spent a lifetime staring into the eyes of eclipses and comets. The face of a king is no more daunting. They speak in quiet tones, reciting what has been written in clay and memory. If the moon is gripped in shadow on the 14th day of the month, they might say, then the ruler must be careful of sickness. Or, if a red star lingers in the west for many nights, then rivers may swell, or the harvest may falter. These are not commands. They are possibilities, like paths traced lightly in dust. And this is where the defiance lives, not in bold thunder, but in the simple, human decision to respond. Perhaps the king orders extra grain to be stored. Perhaps he requests certain rituals, certain offerings to the gods, as if to soften whatever decree might be unfolding above. Perhaps he steps aside from a journey planned for that day, letting the shadow pass without placing himself beneath its darkest center. Each of these choices is small, yet taken together, they are like a hand gently adjusting a thread in a great tangled tapestry. The heavens may weave, but the people below begin to nudge their own place within the pattern. Beneath the silence of the observatory, beneath the formal words of the court, this thought grows. Fate might not be a solid wall, but a veil, and veils can sometimes be shifted. We rise once more to the roof, to the highest terrace, where the night is more vast than fear. The watcher returns to the tablet, the reed poised. Another light has been recorded, another slow change written into the skin of the clay. Where memory fades, the stone remembers. Inside the small chamber, the fresh marks gleam faintly before they dry. Visions of the sky compacted into symbols, stars pressed down into signs, signs pressed into choices. It is quiet here, only the soft crackle of the torch, the distant murmur of water in irrigation canals, the occasional call of a night bird. Yet the stillness is full, like a breath held at the threshold of a question. Some believe that on these nights, the ziggurat itself was an instrument tuned to the sky, its terraces, its stairways, its very orientation aligned with certain stars, certain rising points of the sun and moon. The city below was flat and earthly, concerned with trade and grain and clay bricks. But here, on this raised island of stone, people stepped into a different rhythm, one measured not in days, but in cycles of light and shadow. The ziggurat answered the sky not with noise, but with presence. A mountain where no mountain should be, a summit built by hands instead of by wind and time. From the heavens, it must have looked like an altar. From the earth, it was a reminder that sky and soil could meet halfway. Marked by the moon, watched by the distant fires of the stars, these watchers wrote on in their quiet way. As we approach the end of this night, the chapter softens. The torch burns lower. The watcher sets the stylus aside. The tablet, now inscribed, is placed with care among its companions. Later, it will be carried down, dried in the heat, and stored in a jar among hundreds of others. The question it holds will join a long chain of questions, each one made of baked earth, each one heavier than it looks. Time moves forward. The cities change their names. The kings rise and fall. Floods come and recede. Walls crumble. Gardens dry. The ziggurat, once the proud staircase to the stars, becomes a silhouette. Its sharp edges soften under wind and sand. Rooms collapse. Stairways lose their steps. The observatory chamber fills slowly with dust. Yet somewhere in the darkness, beneath layers of fallen brick and drifting earth, the jars remain. Within them, the tablets sleep, their surfaces quiet, their cuneiform marks intact. If you could reach them, if you could hold one in your hand, you would see the careful lines of an eclipse recorded on a night no one remembers. You would see the breath of a watcher, preserved in clay. Above, the sky continues as it always has. Stars rise and set. Eclipses come and go. The wandering lights still loop in their slow, luminous spirals. The Milky Way still stretches like a silver river across the vault of night. Perhaps it was never meant to be fully understood. Perhaps the sky is not a riddle to be solved, but a presence to be shared, a chamber of light in which our small histories echo for a moment before falling still. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen. The voices of those ancient watchers are faint now, softened by centuries, but they are not gone. They live in the lines we still trace between star and story, in the way we look up when the moon is suddenly swallowed by shadow, in the flutter of wonder we feel when a bright point returns exactly where we knew it would. The ziggurats are ruins now, outlines against the horizon. The tablets are half forgotten, buried beneath the dust of empires. Yet the question they carried remains, hanging gently in the cool night air. Did these patient dreamers truly defy the will of heaven, or did they simply learn to walk more gently beneath it, listening for a pattern in the starlit veil, daring to believe that even within fate there is room for a human breath? The night does not answer. It only holds the silence, and in that silence the listener drifts, softly, towards sleep. It is said that on certain nights, when the desert forgets the heat of the day and the sand cools to a quiet breath, the pyramids no longer seem like monuments. They seem like mountains that have lain down to sleep, their flanks, carved once from sunlight and sweat, turn to silver under the moon. The air grows still. The wind, which wandered all day across dune and stone, pauses at their edges, as if in respect. Beneath this moonlit hush, the desert is not empty. It listens. In the distance, the Nile lies unseen, a dark ribbon breathing softly between its banks. But here, in the plateau of Giza, the river's voice is replaced by silence and shadow. The Great Pyramid rises before us, its angles softened by age and sand, each block a memory of a hand that placed it. The sky above it is a great bowl of dusk sky blue deepening into velvet black, pierced by cold, steady stars. Near the base of the pyramid, in a hollow where the stone meets the sand, a single torch burns. Its flame is small, a trembling ember pressed against the immensity of the night. The light pools on the ground in clay, red and faded copper, licking across carved limestone blocks where once there were smoother casings, polished to catch the sun. Now, only traces remain, like old thoughts that have outlived their language. We drift toward that light, drawn like a moth might be, though our steps are soundless. There is a narrow passage there, an opening cut into the side of the stone mountain, just large enough for a body to pass, or a whisper of wind. The torchlight leans inward, spilling along the floor, and then is swallowed by the dark. We follow. Inside, the sound of the desert disappears. There is only our breath, and the faint, gentle crackle of the flame. The passage slopes upward, then levels, then slopes again, like a slow, deliberate stairway, carved for something more patient than feet. The walls are close, smelling of dust, of old sweat, of a cold that has slept here for thousands of years. The stone is rough beneath the fingertips, yet each block fits against the next with quiet precision, as if the builders were listening for the exact note of rightness before they let it rest. Beneath the silence, there is direction. Although the passage seems to dive into the heart of the pyramid, its line is not careless. It leans, it tilts, it aims. Shafts of stone branch away from the main corridor, narrow and straight, like the veins of some ancient, sleeping creature. They do not lead to courtyards or chambers. They do not lead to light within the pyramid. They point outward, upward, through the enclosing stone, and into the black dome of the sky. Whispers tell us that these shafts are not paths for bodies, but for gaze, for breath, for souls. The question rises, soft and persistent, in the dim air around us. Why would a people of river and flood, a civilization that carved calendars from the rising waters and built granaries to catch the grain of the earth, devote such labor to carving invisible lines whose true destinations lie among the cold sparks of a distant constellation? We pause in the darkness, as if listening for an answer, and instead we hear another sound entirely, a sound from before, from when these corridors were still half a dream. There is no torch now, only oil lamps and the hollow echo of voices. The pyramid is not yet complete. The casing stones still gleam. The ramps still cling like spirals of dust around the rising structure. Inside, in the half-finished passages, men gather around a stretched cord, holding it taut from one block to another. The cord points toward a small square of night where the stone has not yet closed. Outside, Orion moves slowly across the sky. Some believe that in these years of building, priests and architects stood together beneath that towering hunter in the heavens, watching the tilt of his belt, the angle of his ascent. They traced invisible lines with their fingers, from the stars to the horizon, from the horizon to the pyramid, from the pyramid's core back into the sky. They measured with water and plumb lines, with sighting rods and outstretched arms, until the angle of a shaft within the stone echoed the angle of those three bright points above. The pyramid, in their hands, became more than a burial place. It became a question asked in stone. When a king dies, where does his spirit go? In the temples that lay along the Nile, painted walls told stories of the Duat, the hidden land of the dead. Scrolls and carved texts spoke of a journey through an underworld of gates and guardians, of rivers of darkness and lakes of fire, of trials that tested the heart against a feather. But here, inside the pyramid, another story took shape, one that looked not down, but up. It is said that the ancients saw in the constellations not only animals and hunters, but gods and their sacred forms. Orion, with his belt of three aligned stars, was linked to Osiris, lord of the afterlife, god of rebirth and green things. To set a king's resting place in line with this celestial figure was to stitch the ruler's fate to that eternal pattern, to give his soul a ladder of light. In the quiet of the chambers, where the stone seems to press around us like a held breath, we imagine the royal sarcophagus. It lies at the intersection of passages and shafts, a stone vessel within a stone vessel. Around it, the walls are bare to our eyes now, their painted surfaces long lost, their plaster peeled away. But in imagination, we see stars painted there, small golden dots against a dark ceiling, an echo of the world outside. When the king's body was laid here, wrapped in linen and amulets, the corridors were sealed, torches were extinguished, doors were closed. The pyramid became a great, mute container of darkness and silence. Yet the shafts remained open, their mouths aimed at unblinking points above. Some believe that when Orion rose, his belt cutting its bright line through the night, a faint breath of that royal soul stirred, drawn like a spark toward its mirror in the sky. The shafts, long and narrow, became the path of that ascent, guiding the invisible traveler through layers of stone that matched, in some soft way, the layers of the heavens themselves. Beneath the silence, an idea took root. Death was not an ending, but a crossing. Not a fall, but a rising. We drift further through the inner veins of the pyramid, past where the living once walked, into the spaces where only thoughts have lingered. We move gently between myth and stone, between the Nile's steady rhythm and the slow procession of constellations overhead. The river swells and recedes. The stars turn in their great circle. The builders were watching both. Their lives were held between flood and firmament. Outside, the Nile marked the year. its swelling waters carrying new silt, new life, up and down the valley. Fields were mapped to its moods, and survival depended on knowing when it would rise. Inside the observatories and temple courts, priests watched the sky for a different river, the shining band of the Milky Way, and the yearly reappearance of certain stars that foretold the flood. Time became a braid of water and light. In this weaving of earth and heaven, the pyramids were a kind of knot. Their bases were anchored in the dust, but their intentions leaned outward, reaching for the sky. Even their arrangement on the plateau whispers of this leaning. 3 great pyramids, not in a tidy row, but offset, as if echoing a pattern seen not on land, but in the belt of the hunter above. Whispers tell us of those who look at the 3 pyramids and see, in their differing sizes and subtle misalignment, a reflection of the 3 stars in Orion's belt, 2 bright, 1 dim, 2 close together, 1 a little apart. Perhaps it is coincidence, perhaps it is intention, perhaps it is both. In the soft space where certainty thins, mystery breathes easiest. We see scribes bent over papyrus, ink dark as night, copying star lists and hymns. We see temple ceilings painted deep blue, dotted with golden points, the goddess of the sky arched over the world, her body the firmament itself. We see the pharaoh depicted as a star among stars, sailing in a boat across the celestial river, joining the imperishable ones who never set. In this world, to be a king was to be a bridge between the people and the gods, between the land and the sky. To give that king a tomb that leaned toward Orion was to promise him, and perhaps all who believed, that the bridge would not be broken, even by death. We begin to move outward now, back along the passages where dust has settled in quiet drifts. The torchlight ahead grows brighter as the corridor narrows again, funneling us toward the opening and the night. The stone around us feels less like a womb now, and more like a memory, holding within its mass the whispers of 1,000 rituals, 1,000 recitations of the same sacred words. Stepping out onto the desert surface, we find the world unchanged, and yet somehow altered. The pyramids stand as they did before, their edges catching moonlight, their shadows long and cool. The sky is a mirror of itself, the same stars in their slow, patient wheel. Only we have shifted, carrying with us the echo of those inner shafts, the sense of corridors pointing not inward, but outward. We walk a little distance away, to where broken stones lie scattered like the remnants of older walls. There, in a shallow depression, a small pool of water has gathered, perhaps from some rare rain, perhaps from the careful hands of someone who once sought reflection. The surface is still, a dark circle in the sand. We kneel beside it, and the world inverts. In the water, the pyramids become shadows leaning upward. Above them, Orion hangs, his belt clear and bright, 3 points of white fire stitched into the black cloth of the sky. In the reflection, it is as if those stars hang directly above the stone peaks, a chain of light fastening heaven to earth. Beneath the silence, a thought moves softly. Perhaps these monuments were not only tombs of kings, but instruments, devices of dust and intention, tuned to the music of the stars, a way of saying to the universe, remember this name, remember this life, let it echo among your lights. Where memory fades, stone remember for a while. Where stone crumbles, starlight continues, indifferent and eternal. We do not know, in the end, whether the pyramids truly lean toward Orion by design, or whether we, in our longing for meaning, lean toward seeing patterns in their massive, quiet forms. Perhaps both are true. Perhaps it was never meant to be fully known. What remains is the feeling of standing here, at the edge of the desert night, between the cool shadow of ancient stone and the cold fire of distant suns. The pyramids breathe their slow, unmoving breath. The Orion belt glows, unhurried, as it did when the first block was laid. The water in the shallow pool trembles once, with a faint breeze, blurring the reflection, then settles again. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen. The voice of this place is very old, very patient, and it does not insist. It simply is. We rise, stepping back from the pool, the image of the belt of Orion lingering behind our closed eyes. The pyramids become once more dark silhouettes against a sky that has changed so little, while empires have turned to dust. The desert cools further, the night deepens, and somewhere between stone and star, between river and constellation, the unanswered question hangs like a lantern on an invisible line. Were these structures built to defy the darkness of death, or simply to lean gently toward the light, trusting that the heavens, in their own silent way, would lean a little back? The night offers no reply. It only wraps itself around the pyramids, and around you, like a vast, quiet cloak, as the edges of wakefulness slowly dissolve, and you drift, softly, into sleep. It is said that there is a field in an old land, where the earth remembers the weight of footsteps that have long since faded, and the sky still leans low enough to listen. We arrive there in the hush, just before dawn. The grass is damp, each blade holding a tiny bead of water that catches the faint grey light. A low mist lies over the ground like a thin, sleeping veil, blurring the line between earth and air. Beneath it, the shapes of stones rise up, dark and patient, like a ring of worn teeth biting softly into the sky. They are not polished. They are not grand in the way of later temples, with smooth columns and carved reliefs. These stones are rough, scarred by weather, crusted with lichen in patches of misty green and faded copper. Some lean a little, some stand straight. Together, they form a circle that has waited here longer than any name we remember. The first image is simple and calm, a pale winter dawn, the air cold enough that each breath leaves a small cloud, briefly visible, then gone. The horizon is a dull band of light, neither night nor day. Between two of the stones, there is a narrow opening, a small gate framed by rock. Through that gap, something is about to happen. A faint ember of sun, still hidden below the line of the earth, is climbing toward that opening. We feel it before we see it, a subtle brightening, a slow deepening of the grey. The sky behind the stones begins to blush with clay, red and soft gold, like a scroll being gently unrolled. We stand inside the circle, wrapped in silence, watching the gap. Beneath the silence, there is a memory of many such mornings. Whispers tell us that when these stones were first raised, the world felt smaller and the sky felt closer. There were no cities of stone yet, no written scrolls to capture seasons in ink. There was only the land and its people, the slow march of hunger and harvest, the breath of the wind over open fields. In those days, the sun was not simply light. It was a presence, giver of warmth, caller of seeds from soil, keeper of shadows. Its path across the sky was watched with reverent patience, noted in the angle of shadows, in the length of days, in the way the light fell across familiar hills. Some believe that long before this circle, there were simpler marks, wooden posts stuck into the ground, stones laid flat in lines, a notch carved into a hillside where people could stand and see the sun rise between two distant peaks at a certain time of year. Little by little, these markers grew more deliberate, more refined, like thoughts returning to the same question, again and again. Where does the sun rise now? Where did it rise before? Where will it rise when winter has gone on too long, and the grain in the storehouse feels too thin? The people learned, patiently, that the sun does not wander without pattern. It shifts along the horizon, each day a little different, each dawn a note in a long, repeating song. At one extreme, it rises far to the south, and the day is short, the air sharp, the fields sleeping. At the other extreme, far to the north, the day stretches, the earth grows warm, and life bursts outward. These two turning points, the solstices, became the great hinges of the year. And so, in this field, at the edge of mist and memory, some hands decided to catch that hinge in stone. We move slowly among the standing stones now, as if our steps might wake them. Each stone is heavy with lichens and rain, with frost that has come and gone, with the small, invisible touch of countless dawns. Some are tall, some shorter, some paired, some standing alone. If you place your hand upon one, it is cold, slightly damp, rough, as an old story told many times. Beneath your palm, you might feel a faint sense of direction, not in the way of compasses and measurements, but in the way of something that is not random. The stones are not scattered. They are placed. Each has a face turned somewhere. Each has a purpose we no longer fully see. In forgotten corners of the earth, there are many such circles, rings of stone, horseshoes of stone, single monoliths leaning into the wind. This one, like its siblings, is both simple and impossible. Simple, because it is only rock. Impossible, because it has outlived those who imagined it by thousands of winters. And still, on mornings like this, it answers the sun. We listen for the voices of those who raised it. We imagine them entering this field long before any of our names had meaning. There is no metal yet, no wheel. There is only muscle and rope, log and lever, patience and song. They haul the great slabs over damp earth, their feet leaving tracks in the mud. They set them upright in pits they have dug, filling the gaps with stones and soil, stamping them down. They lean their bodies into the task, like a prayer written in effort. There are no blueprints. There are no written notes. The design lives in memory, in the quiet instructions of the elders, in the way they point toward the horizon and say, "Here, this is where the sun stood still." A few times each year, they stand in this same circle, watching the dawn. Perhaps they mark the place where the first sliver of light appears, notching it with small stones or scratches in the ground. Perhaps they watch for years, for decades, learning when the sun goes as far as it can in one direction and then begins to creep back, as if reconsidering. When at last they know the place where the winter sun turns, where it pauses before beginning its long return toward warmth, they set their highest stones. 2 pillars, standing side by side, forming a narrow gate, a gate for light. We linger now at that opening, feeling the cold bite more deeply as we wait with them. The sky is brightening behind the gap, the mist taking on a faint golden blush. Birds that have been silent during the darkest hour begin to stir in the hedges. Our breath thickens in the air. The stones around us stand in mute expectation, as if the entire circle is holding a single, slow inhalation. The sun breaks. At first, it is just a blade of light, a thin, bright line between the stones, sharp and almost unreal. It cuts through the mist in a beam, straight and low, touching the dark soil of the inner circle. Then the ember grows, the edge widening, a coin of fire rising through the very center of the gate that the people set so long ago. For a few breathless moments, stone, earth, and sky move together in a slow, sacred dance. The beam of light extends, reaching toward the center of the circle, washing over one particular stone, perhaps a central marker, perhaps simply the nearest to the path of dawn. The grass glows in a soft, golden pathway, each droplet of dew lit from within, as if tiny stars have fallen to rest on the blades. It is said that on such mornings, when the solstice sun slides perfectly through the gap, all the years between then and now fall away. We stand beside those earliest watchers. We feel what they might have felt: relief, awe, something very close to gratitude. The darkest days have peaked. The long slide into night has reached its edge. The sun has turned, and though the air will remain cold for weeks, though the fields still sleep, though the stores are still carefully measured, there is a promise hanging in that light. The year will not end in darkness. The cycle will continue. Was this circle a calendar of survival? Perhaps. In lands where winters were long and harvests uncertain, knowing where one stood in the wheel of the seasons was not a luxury, it was a necessity. To misjudge the turning of the year, to plant too early or too late, to celebrate when one should be storing, or to hoard when one could have feasted, was to risk hunger, sickness, loss. Beneath the silence of these stones, we can sense the weight of that concern. The lines in the sky are not just beauty, they are information. The sun's shifting path across the horizon is a scroll written in light, and the circle of stones is a way of reading it, of fixing certain words in place. The winter solstice marks a kind of invisible gateway, the longest night, the shortest day. In many old traditions, it became the time of fires, of candles placed against the dark, of stories told long into the night. It was an acknowledgement of fear, the fear that this time the sun might not come back. By building this circle, by learning to predict the exact place where the sun would return, the people may have given themselves a small, steadying handhold, a way to say, "Here, stand here, and you will see that it still turns. Watch, and you will know that the promise holds." Or was it something more? Some believe this place was not only a calendar, but a temple. Not a temple of walls and roof, but of open air and patient stone. A place where heaven and earth met in a single, thin line. On the longest night, when fear sat quietly beside hope in every human chest, people might have gathered in this circle with more than practical thoughts. They might have brought offerings, grain, carved tokens, perhaps a scrap of cloth, a piece of treasured bone. They might have placed these at the feet of certain stones, whispering words that have now dissolved into the wind. They might have watched the opening between the stones with a kind of deep, still longing, not just for warmth and harvest, but for assurance that the world still held them, that the great forces beyond their understanding were not indifferent. When the sun's first ember appeared, when the light cut cleanly through the gate and spilled onto the earth, perhaps they believed that their watching helped, that their presence, their breath, their attention, coaxed the light back from the dark, not in the way of controlling, but in the way of participating, of being part of the turning, rather than merely subject to it. Beneath the silence of the stones, beneath the crust of lichen and the dust of centuries, the idea rests that ritual is a bridge between what we know and what we cannot know. The circle here is a shape given to that bridge, a ring of solidity around an invisible point where sky and earth exchange a glance. We step back now, slowly, letting the light play over the stones as the sun climbs. The narrow beam that once fell perfectly through the gate begins to widen, losing its sharpness. It is no longer a precise pathway. It is simply daylight. The magic of the alignment has passed, at least for our eyes. Where memory fades, the stones stand on, remembering for us. They mark in their positions, not only this morning, but all the mornings like it that have come and gone. Each solstice, the same dance. Each year, the same careful threading of light. Each cycle, another round in the quiet, oceanic rhythm of the sky. We look at the stones in silhouette now, dark against the strengthening day, and then we close our eyes. In the darkness behind our lids, we can still see the streak of gold between the stones, the circle bathed in soft radiance, the mist glowing as if lit from within. The field returns to itself. The mist, which had thinned, gathers again in low hollows. The dew begins to fade. Birds move in, jerks and flutters along the hedgerows, unconcerned with solstices and corridors of light. The stones stand guard, as they always have, unhurried. Beneath the silence, the wonder remains unresolved. Did those ancient builders defy the fear of endless winter by chaining the sun to their circle? Did they believe that by raising these stones and watching that precise gap, they could tie the wheel of the year to their own place on the earth, ensuring that the light would not abandon them? Or did they simply learn to bow in time with the turning of the sky? Perhaps they understood something we are still learning, that to watch the world with reverence is its own kind of survival. That to mark the moments when light returns, when darkness thins, when the year turns over in its sleep, is to be woven more gently into the pattern of things. Perhaps it was never meant to be fully explained. Perhaps the circle that caught the solstice sun is both calendar and temple, both instrument and prayer, both stone and story. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen. Tonight, as you drift towards sleep, you carry a little of this field with you. The damp grass underfoot, the breath of cold air, the narrow opening between stones, the single ember of sun rising exactly where it was invited to rise. Outside your window, in a sky that still turns, the same sun will set and rise again. Somewhere, in some forgotten field, the same circle of stones waits for another winter morning, another thread of light through its ancient gate. The answer is not given. Only the quiet invitation remains, to stand, at least in the mind, within that ring, and let the slow, sacred dance of stone and sun lull the heart into stillness as the world turns softly on. It is said that there are deserts where the earth is so still, so rarely touched by rain, that a single footprint can linger for years, and a dragged line in the dust can outlive the memory of the hand that made it. We begin above such a place. The scene opens high above a broad plateau, where the world below is made of pale sand and reddish stone, spread out in quiet, unbroken sheets. At first it seems empty, almost featureless, a vast, dry skin stretched beneath the thin blue breath of the sky. No trees break the horizon, no rivers glimmer, no houses cling to the slopes. Only dust, only rock, only silence. We drift higher, as if the desert itself is exhaling us upward. From this height, the plateau looks like a forgotten page, left blank for countless seasons. Then, very slowly, as our gaze softens, faint lines begin to appear. They are delicate, almost shy, pale scratches across a paler ground. A curve here, a straight line there, a subtle angle that does not seem like chance. We trace them with our eyes and recognize shapes unfolding like memories. The long beak and outstretched wings of a hummingbird, frozen mid-hover in a place where no flower grows. The coiled length of a serpent, winding across the plain as if daring the dryness to move. A straight path that begins decisively and then loses itself in the distance, as if unsure whether it is meant for feet or for something else. These figures are not small. They are enormous, stretching hundreds of paces from wingtip to wingtip, from coiled tail to lifted head. Yet from the desert floor, they are almost invisible lines no deeper than the width of a hand, cut into the thin veneer of darker stone to reveal the lighter earth beneath. The first question rises gently, like heat from the ground. Who were the patient artists who carved such vast shapes into the skin of the desert, visible only from a height no human of their time could reach? Beneath the silence, something waits to be remembered. Whispers tell us that long ago, when the sun here was the same unblinking eye it is now, people lived at the edges of this emptiness. They settled near rare rivers and seasonal streams, in valleys carved by water that came less and less often. They learned the moods of the wind, the sting of dust storms, the blessing of clouds that sometimes never broke open. In forgotten corners of the earth, survival breeds a certain kind of attention. Every change in the sky matters, every shift in the wind carries meaning. A thin line of cloud on the horizon is not just a cloud, it is a question. Will it come closer? Will it break? Will it leave nothing? It is said that those who lived near this plateau watched not only the sky, but the plateau itself. They watched how water flowed or failed to flow across its surface. They saw how tracks of animals etched brief paths across the dust before being stolen by wind. They saw how long their own footprints lingered, how a dragged branch or a pulled stone could leave a line that outlasted the season. Perhaps, one day, someone drew a longer line. A child, maybe, playing. A priest, perhaps, walking in circles. A farmer returning to the fields, idly scuffing a mark with a staff. The line caught the eye of another. They saw how it lay against the slope, how it pointed to something, a hill, a sunrise, a star. Beneath such small, human gestures, an idea can take root. What if the desert itself could be written upon? What if the earth, often so unyielding, could become a scroll? We drift down now, through thin, heated air, closer to the plateau's face. The grand shapes we saw from above dissolve into modest marks, narrow bands of cleared stone cutting through the darker surface. We see small groups of people moving along these lines, their figures low and careful, like shadows leaning into the wind. Their feet are dusted white, their legs marked with the powder of stone they have scraped away. They carry cords and stakes, bundles of reeds, perhaps simple measuring tools. There are no bird's-eye views for them. They cannot see the hummingbird, insad, the serpent, the path not as we see them. For them, there is only earth and horizon, a straight line that must be straight, a curve that must be gradual, a turning point marked by a stake driven into the ground, a knot tied in a rope. Imagine the patience of this work. It is said that they planned with small drawings scratched onto shards of pottery or pressed into smooth clay tiny, hand-sized versions of the figures that would one day stretch across the plateau. They scaled them up not with magic, but with ratios, with counting, with repeated steps measured by chord and breath. Some believe that they used a simple method, a designer standing at the center, turning slowly, instructing workers at the edge to move left, right, forward, back. a human compass drawing with bodies and string instead of ink. Others suggest they followed the stars, aligning their lines with rise points and angles remembered from long nights of watching. Beneath the silence, intention hums like a low, continuous note. They remove the darker stones, revealing the paler ground beneath. The contrast is subtle, but in this desert, subtlety is enough. The earth remembers where it has been touched. The figures grow, piece by piece, line by line, a giant sketch unfolding beneath feet that will never fully see it. Their work is hidden from their own eyes, yet it is offered, patiently, to something watching from above. Was that watcher a god, a spirit of sky and mountain, a family of wind and cloud, or was it the invisible gaze of the stars themselves, the far-off eyes that mark the night with cold fire? Here, myth and memory begin to braid together. Some say these lines were prayers laid flat upon the earth, meant for deities who travelled across the heavens. Water gods, perhaps, whom the people hoped to entice toward their thirsty valleys. To such powers, a small shrine might not be enough. A single stone, a single song might pass unheard. But a hummingbird, larger than a village, carved into the desert floor and shining pale under the moon, that might be loud enough to catch their attention. Others believe the lines were routes, ceremonial pathways walked in silence, their lengths measured in breaths and heartbeats. The figures may have been less important than the act of moving along them, tracing their curves with the body, turning in time with their spirals. To walk the path of a serpent might be to move like rain, snaking its way down a mountain. To follow the line of a bird might be to accompany the wind on its invisible migration. And then there are those who see in these figures not only animals, but constellations, stars mirrored on the ground. The hummingbird echoing a cluster of lights that rise at a certain season, marking when to plant or when to harvest. The serpent, reflecting a twisting band of stars that arcs across the sky like an endless river of fire. The straight paths aligning with solstice sunrises, with equinox sunsets, with the points where the moon's course meets the edges of the earth. Beneath the silence, the plateau may have been more than a canvas. It may have been a map of time, of water, of the heavens. As we move slowly across this stony skin, the air thins and cools. The sun, that white, unblinking eye, drifts toward the horizon. The long shadows of the surrounding hills reach out like quiet fingers, touching the lines one by one. Day gives way to evening. The reddish stones deepen to clay red and muted brown. The pale lines soften to a faint glow. The workers, whose footprints overlap along the paths, withdraw toward their villages, their fires, their stories. The plateau, still marked by their intention, is left alone once more. Night falls. With the sun's departure, another light arrives. Stars bloom slowly in the deepening dusk, first as faint whispers, then as 1,000 clear points etched into the dark. The Milky Way rises like an oceanic band of dust and silver, rolling across the sky in a tide of distant suns. From above, the figures on the plateau become more visible again, their pale lines catching what little starlight there is. From a higher vantage, one we can only imagine, the hummingbird and serpent and wandering paths turn into faint silver scars on the desert's back. It is here, under this spread of stars, that the place feels most enchanted. The air is thin and cold, each breath leaving the lips like a brief offering to the sky. There is no sound but the small sigh of nocturnal wind, brushing over stone and into the carved lines. The desert radiates back the heat of the day, a lingering warmth beneath the chill, like coals cooling under ash. Beneath the silence, the plateau speaks in shapes. We can imagine those who once stood nearby, looking up, their necks bent, their eyes tracing constellations. They would have known the names of the bright stars, the times when certain clusters rose, the seasons they announced. They would have seen patterns in the darkness between stars as well as in the stars themselves, animals, spirits, paths. If they knew the figures on the ground echoed these heavenly forms, perhaps they believed they were drawing down the sky itself, inviting it to settle for a moment upon the earth. A hummingbird in the heavens, a hummingbird in the dust, a serpent of stars, a serpent of stone. It is said that in such places the boundary between above and below grows thin. The plateau becomes a mirror, and the sky leans close, reading its own reflection in lines of earth instead of ink. The geoglyphs, then, are like prayers written in a language both sky and land can understand. Where memory fades, the lines remain, at least for a while. They survive not because they were carved deep, but because the desert is kind to stillness. Rain falls rarely, plants do not claw at the soil, footsteps are few, the plateau holds its breath. Yet even in such places, time moves on, sand shifts, stones crack, new paths are trodden, old ones abandoned. Some lines blur until they are almost impossible to see, others remain clear, as if guarded by the very dryness that once threatened the people who made them. We drift forward, further into time, watching the villages that fed the workers thin and change. New beliefs rise, new gods, new stories. The reason for the lines is forgotten gradually, not all at once. Perhaps a last elder points to a figure on the horizon and says, "Our ancestors walked there once, when the rains failed." Perhaps a child hears this and does not fully understand. Then the elder is gone. The story goes with them. The lines stay. They wait beneath the clear, hard light of day and the gentle wash of stars at night. Birds pass overhead. A rare cloud drifts by, and on some days nothing at all moves across their wide, pale backs. To those who come much later, the lines are puzzle and poem. From the ground, they are confusing, incomplete. A strange trench here, a suspiciously straight segment there, disappearing over a low rise. But from above, where only birds, and later other eyes, can look, the figures assemble themselves again. The hummingbird spreads its wings. The serpent coils. The path that seemed to go nowhere falls into place as part of a larger pattern. It is a paradox that lingers. Images so large, they cannot be fully seen from the ground, yet made by hands that knew only earth and horizon. Dawn comes again. The stars fade one by one, like candles being gently pinched out. The Milky Way dissolves into a faint, forgotten smudge. The sky lightens, turning from black to deep blue to a pale wash of dusk sky hues. The plateau wakens to its familiar brightness. In the slanting light of early morning, the lines briefly stand out once more. Their pale paths catch the sun at a shallow angle, casting tiny shadows, revealing their shapes in delicate contrast. From our high vantage, we can still see them clearly, but as the sun climbs, as the light pours more directly down, the lines sink back into the desert's skin. Their brightness merges with the ground around them. To eyes on the plateau itself, they become nearly invisible again, seen only in fleeting glimpses by passing birds, by wandering animals, by shadows that trace their edges for a moment and then move on. Beneath the silence, the mystery remains quiet and unclaimed. Were these lines of dust written for the sky, true messages to an unseen gaze among the stars? Did those who made them believe that the gods of wind and cloud, of water and darkness, could read them as easily as a priest reads a scroll? Or were they, in the end, a way for human hands to touch the vastness without leaving the ground? A way to make the heavens feel close enough to trace, to shape, to echo upon the earth? Perhaps it was never meant to be answered. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen. The voice of this plateau is a faint one, carried in the whisper of dust and the delicate curves of its enduring figures. It does not insist, it only persists. As you drift toward sleep, you may carry the image of those pale lines with you: hummingbird, serpent, path stretching across a quiet desert under a slowly turning sky, the earth below, the stars above, and between them, for a moment, the thought that even in the most barren places, there have been hands that wrote not for other hands, but for something far beyond our sight. The plateau softens in your mind. The shapes fade like footprints in light. The question lingers, gentle as breath. Were they drawing for the gods, or for themselves? The night does not answer. It only spreads around you, wide and calm and star-marked, as your own thoughts settle, like dust, into a silence that feels very much like rest. It is said that deep in the green heart of an old jungle, where the air hangs heavy with the scent of leaves and damp stone, there stands a hill that is not a hill. From a distance it looks like a simple rise in the earth, a strange angular mound wrapped in trees and strangled with roots. But as we draw closer, the shape sharpens, the lines straighten, and we see what the forest has tried to forget. Terraces, steps, a stairway that climbs into the canopy like a ladder carved from sandstone and sunlight. The jungle murmurs around it. Insects hum in layered choruses. A bird cries once and then falls silent. Vines hang like faded curtains from high ledges, and orchids bloom in the cracks between ancient blocks, their petals soft against the hard geometry of the stone. At the top of this stepped pyramid, half hidden by foliage, sits a small temple. Its corners have crumbled, its roof is broken in places, yet it still holds a strange kind of poise, as if it remembers the moment when it mattered most. Once, its walls were bright with paint. Now they are veiled in moss and lichen, misty green and faded copper. Still, something about it feels as if it holds a fragment of the sky, caught and folded into its own quiet space. Above the temple, the heavens are beginning to darken. The last embers of day linger low on the horizon, turning the clouds to clay red and dusk sky blue, smeared like pigment across a vast, unseen canvas. And there, near the edge, where sky meets earth, hangs a single bright star. It is not truly a star, of course. We know this now. But to the people who once walked these steps, it was a wandering light, a seed of fire that appeared and disappeared with unsettling regularity. Sometimes in the evening, sometimes before dawn, sometimes dazzling, sometimes absent. Venus, the planet that would haunt their calendars and prophecy, the restless eye that watched from just above the horizon. Whispers tell us that in its time of breath and ceremony, this temple did not belong to the sun alone. Its stairways did not only greet midday light, its narrow doorways did not only catch the ordinary dawn. It was tuned, like an instrument, to the movements of this wandering star. We enter it now in the imagination, not as intruders, but as quiet listeners. A watcher stands at the top of the steps, on the temple platform, in a night that is neither fully dark nor fully bright. The sounds of the jungle below are a soft oceanic echo, the leaves breathing in low, slow waves. The horizon glows with the last sadness of the sun and the first shy brightness of the star. The watcher does not look at the forest. They look outward, beyond, toward that faint point of light that has just pierced the veil. In one hand, they hold a folded book made of bark, its surface coated in white, its pages layered like the leaves around them. In the other hand, a brush tipped with black, dark as cooled obsidian. On the pages, neat columns of numbers march like small, regular steps. Dates, intervals, counts of days, dots and bars, glyphs that carry meaning like vessels carry water. The star appears exactly where they expected it to. Not too high, not too low, not too early, not too late. They inhale, deeply, and there is a sense that the star inhales with them. Another mark is added to the book, carefully, as if each stroke might bruise the passage of time itself. Another evening star, counted, another breath of Venus. We drift with the watcher through the nights and mornings that follow, gliding like a patient breeze over the jungle, watching the same ritual repeat with small variations. Sometimes Venus is the evening star, trailing the sun into the west, shining in the fragile time between day and full night. Sometimes it is the morning star, rising before dawn, a bright herald before the sun's own fire breaks. The years pass in cycles of light and absence. It is said that the priests of this city, though they might not have called themselves that, lived in the rhythm of these appearances. They kept long counts of evenings and mornings, weaving them into the tapestry of their calendar. They knew that Venus and the sun shared secret appointments, meeting and parting in patterns too slow to see at first glance, but clear when written as lines of numbers, when traced across decades. The temple that crowns this pyramid was built to catch those appointments in stone. Walk with me through its shadowed rooms. Inside, the air is cooler. The noise of the jungle fades, replaced by a muffled stillness, broken only by the occasional drip of water from a crack in the ceiling where a root has forced its way through. The inner walls are crowded with carved glyphs, spirals, faces, hands, star-marked symbols pressed into plaster and paint. now ghostly under the film of ages. On one wall, the story of time flows like a river. Columns of signs mark days, months, great cycles. Among them, small symbols repeat: a shell, a star, a serpent, a jaw. Each cluster records one of Venus's appearances: when it first blazed in the evening sky, when it vanished into the sun's glare, when it returned as a morning light. The people who carved these walls did not think of time as we do, as something we lose or lack. For them, time was a living thing, a sacred river that wound through the world in looping curves. It rose and fell like the jungle's rains. It had seasons, moods, breaths. Venus was one of its breaths. When the star rose, the river quickened. When the star vanished, the river plunged into an unseen channel, flowing beneath the surface of the world for a while, only to surface again in another guise. In these shadowed rooms, the priests tried to measure that breath, not to imprison it, but to know it, to learn when it would inhale, when it would exhale, when its rising might whisper of rain or of drought, of prosperity or of looming war, of the favor or displeasure of distant, veiled gods. We step out of the temple again, onto a high platform that overlooks the sacred city. Beneath us lies a world that is both stone and green. Pyramids and terraces rise from the embrace of the jungle, their edges softened by vines and roots. Plazas open like calm, stone lakes between the buildings, their surfaces remembering the footsteps of crowds. Beneath the canopy, the city once glittered with colors: red, white, blue, black. But now only hints remain, clinging to sheltered corners. The rest has been given back to dust. In its days of breath and ceremony, this was not a silent place. On certain evenings, when the watchers in the temple had counted carefully, when their bark books and carved stones agreed, word would spread: tonight, the wandering star will rise again, at just such a place on the horizon, at just such a moment after the sun has gone. People would come. They would fill the plazas, their faces turned toward the west, toward a notch between hills, or a carved stone standing alone, aligned with an intention older than anyone present. The air would hold a low murmur of voices, then fall quiet as the light dimmed. Children might be hushed and lifted. Torches flickered along terrace edges, their smoke rising in slow, spiraled plumes. The temple at the top of the pyramid watched over it all, like an eye set in stone. The sky would darken, and for a moment there would be only the afterglow of the sun, a fading band of ember color smudged above the trees. Then, precisely where the calculations had said it would be, a small, intense point of light would pierce the veil. Venus. A soft breath would move through the crowd. Some would feel wonder, some reassurance. For rulers and priests, there might be more complex emotions: relief that the predictions were correct, the universe still aligned with their understanding. In that shared inhale, something subtle but powerful happened. Human lives, messy, fragile, uncertain, felt briefly woven into the fabric of the sky. The temple had promised, and the heavens had answered, or so it seemed. Of course, not everything could be read with certainty. The star rose, as expected, but storms still came when they were not wanted. Harvests sometimes failed despite careful counting. Rulers fell ill when they were meant to be strong. Wars erupted when the glyphs had suggested peace. Yet even in such contradictions, the practice endured. Beneath the silence of these stones, we can still feel the soft determination of those timekeepers. They did not abandon their counts at the first failed prophecy. Instead, they refined their patterns, noting when their expectations did not match reality, adjusting their interpretations like a hand gently shifting a weaving on a loom. They might have said, "When Venus rises here, it usually heralds rain," but not always. When it appears as morning star after so many days of absence, power may change hands, but not in every case. Their glyphs and numbers became less rigid commands, and more like a basket of possibilities, from which events might be drawn. Walking among their carved records, we see the humility tucked inside their ambition. They were trying to defy uncertainty not with force, but with attentiveness, with care, with centuries of watching. Beneath the jungle's patient assault, this world slowly sank. The bark books, so carefully folded and inked, were among the first to go. A little dampness, a little mold, a little neglect, and their pages curled and darkened, their numbers dissolving back into the fibers. Flames may have taken some, human hands others. In the end, no bark books remain here, only the grooves in the walls, the marks in the stone. The city's heartbeat slowed, terraces cracked, roofs fell, trees slipped their roots into any opening they could find, prying apart blocks that had once resisted armies. Vines wrapped themselves around stairways, soft green spirals claiming hard edges. The temple at the top of the pyramid grew a second skin of moss, and above it all, the sky continued its quiet procession. Venus still rose and fell, now over an audience of leaves and birds instead of crowds and courtyards. The wandering star kept its appointments with the horizon and the sun, indifferent yet faithful, as precise in its cycles as it had been when the first glyph was carved to mark its breath. We stand now in the quiet ruins, long after the last watcher has departed. The steps are cracked, half choked with soil and leaf litter. The temple's doorway frames a slice of sky where a branch once could not reach. Inside, where once lamps burned and voices murmured over numbers and names, there is only the faint drip of water and the rustle of small creatures in the walls. If you climb the steps and stand in the right place at the right time, you may still see what they saw. On some evenings, just after the sun has dissolved into color, a single bright point will emerge, low and clear, near a notch of hills that no longer has a name. It will appear not because anyone has counted for it, not because any bark book has commanded it, but because that is its way. In that moment, the temple, half swallowed by moss and silence, fulfills its purpose again. Not entirely, not with ceremony, but with a faint echo of what once was. A stone aligned, so that when Venus breathes, the earth seems, just for an instant, to breathe with it. Perhaps it was never meant to be more than this. Perhaps the people who built this place knew, even in their most ambitious calculations, that they could not truly control storms or secure harvests. Perhaps, beneath their public rituals and royal assurances, there was a quieter understanding, that they were not binding the skies to their will, but binding themselves to the rhythm of something vast and unknowable. To count the breaths of Venus was to confess that they, too, were breathing. To predict its rising was to acknowledge that it would rise whether or not they watched, and yet that watching mattered. Where memory fades, the stars still remember their paths. Where the temple crumbles, the sky remains star-marked, indifferent, yet strangely intimate. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen. The voice of this place is not in its fallen stones or its empty chambers, but in the way our own gaze might lift toward the evening or morning star, feeling, without charts or glyphs, a faint tug of connection. Those timekeepers, standing atop the pyramid in nights long vanished, tried in their own sacred way to defy uncertainty not by denying it, but by learning its patterns, by finding a kind of gentleness within its strictness, by telling their people, and perhaps themselves, that in a world of shifting rains and fragile crops and mortal rulers, there is at least one wandering light whose dance can be known. Venus still rises, the jungle still breathes, the temple still watches, even as it sleeps. And as you drift toward your own sleep, you might imagine that distant, shimmering point on the horizon, inhaling and exhaling in its slow, celestial rhythm, a reminder that somewhere between chaos and control lies the simple, ancient act of looking up, counting softly, and letting the vastness of the sky move through you like a quiet, steady breath. It is said that there are nights when the sea forgets its rage, when the waves breathe slow and deep, like a sleeping animal, and the sky above it widens until it feels too large to belong to this world. We open under such a sky. Overhead, the heavens are scattered with bright star rivers, streams of light flowing from one edge of the night to the other. The Milky Way stretches like a pale, celestial reef, a broken band of dust and distant suns. Around it, constellations burn in quiet patterns, old shapes stitched into the dark by people long ago who needed those lights to remember their way home. Below, the ocean is not a flat surface. It is a dark, breathing mirror. Swells roll slowly, their backs gleaming wherever starlight touches them. Each wave seems to carry its own thought, its own direction, its own small echo of the vastness above. Cutting across this moving plain, almost without a sound, is a canoe. It is small against the spread of water and sky, a mere sliver of wood and woven fiber, no towering mast, no compass nailed to the deck, no chart rolled out under a lantern. There are no visible landmarks, no coastline, no familiar silhouette of mountain or reef. There is only the curve of the horizon, a dark circle enclosing the world like a soft, uncertain wall. In that fragile vessel, a navigator sits with their face turned upward. The outline of their features is traced in starlight, the slope of a brow, the bridge of a nose, the calm plane of a gaze that does not cling to the horizon, but lifts, steadily, to the celestial dome. They are reading, not a scroll, not a map, but the sky itself, as if it were an ancient script written in points of fire. The opening question rises quietly, the way mist rises from warm water. How did people in such small exposed vessels cross entire oceans without the fear of falling away from the world? How did they set out from the safety of distant islands and sail straight into the open dark, guided only by winds, waves, and the slow pivot of constellations? Beneath the silence of the night, the answer is not given in words. It is given in the rhythm of the sea. Whispers tell us that in forgotten centuries, scattered across the great blue reaches of the world, there were islands like beads on an invisible thread. Some were wide and lush, others were no more than low rings of sand and palms barely rising above the waves. Between them stretched distances so vast that to step into that space must have felt like stepping off the edge of memory itself. To live on such islands was to live at the edge of everything. To travel between them was to trust that the world did not end where sight did. It is said that in those lands, navigation was not a skill learned from paper. It was a sacred practice, kept and shared in special houses, under roofs that seemed to echo the sky. Some of these houses were built with their beams laid out in careful angles, each rafter pointing toward a star's rising place. Inside, the roof itself became a map, a star compass overhead, where each beam held a name, and each name held a direction. Young learners would sit in the dimness, the air smelling of wood and salt and the faint tang of dried palm leaves. An elder would sit at the center, where the fire's smoke curled upward through a hole in the roof, and point to the beams one by one, reciting the names of the star paths. The students would answer, repeating the names in a gentle chant. Each syllable pointed to a segment of the horizon. Each chant traced an invisible road through the dark. Stars were not just distant fires. They were markers, signposts, way stations along routes that crossed hundreds upon hundreds of miles of ocean. Outside those houses, the sea rolled and whispered. Inside, memory grew. We drift beside the voyagers now, the canoe gliding through a field of starlight scattered on black water. There are no maps drawn in ink, but there is a map in the mind of the navigator, a woven tapestry of stories and patterns. They know, for example, that when a certain bright star rises from the sea just there, at that notch in the horizon, it points the way to a particular island lying beyond any visible land. They know that when the Milky Way stands upright at a certain hour, their canoe is holding the right path. When it lies low, they may have drifted. They know, too, that the sky is not the only guide. Beneath the surface, the ocean is full of invisible lines. Swells travel in long, steady bands, some born in distant storms, others shaped by the unseen presence of far-off reefs and islands. Even when the wind is quiet at the canoe, the navigator can feel these swells as they pass under the hull, pressing gently from one side, then the other. It is said that learned wayfinders could sit with eyes closed and still know the direction of their journey by the rhythm beneath them. They felt how one swell crossed another, how one rhythm overrode the other when they neared certain currents. These intersections, these crossing of wave roads, were as distinctive as valleys and mountain passes are to those who walk on land. The canoe rides a dominant swell now, angled in a particular way against its flow. The navigator has chosen this alignment carefully. It is one of the invisible roads. Overhead, a bright star lifts from the black lip of the sea. The navigator notes its place, not with a clock or instrument, but with a kind of internal measure. Perhaps they hum a fragment of an old song marked for this star, this direction, each verse a course, each pause a turning point. In some island traditions, star paths were taught as chants, long and intricate, that described entire voyages in imagery and rhythm. A verse might go something like, "When the shark's fin star rises from the sea before dawn, keep its bright point off the left bow until the sun lifts. Then turn until the great bird of the south stands above the mast." These were not lines written on parchment, but living poems lodged in the body. They were recited again and again on land, under the watchful eyes of elders, and then tested on the water, where the real script played out in moving lights and breathing waves. The navigator did not travel alone. Even when their canoe carried many, it carried also the presence of those who had sailed before, the remembered voices of teachers, the echoes of hands pointing at stars in the dark. The horizon, which to an untrained eye is a boundary, became for them a thin, permeable veil. Beyond it, they knew, lay other islands, other fires, other people who read the same sky in their own way. Beneath the silence of the open sea, there was a constant conversation, between wave and star, between bird and cloud, between memory and the moment. We drift with the voyagers through a stretch of days when no land appears. Morning comes, pale light unfolding over the water, turning the sea from black to steel to a vast, aching blue that seems to go on forever. The canoe rides the swell like a leaf in a slow, deliberate breath. The sun climbs, arcs, and descends again. No shoreline breaks the circle of the horizon. At sunset, the sea catches the last colors of the day: gold, clay red, a soft band of rose along the edge of the world, then extinguished. Night returns with its stars. To those who have never known such travel, the unease would be heavy, the sense of being suspended in emptiness, the fear that perhaps the world does end where sight ends, and that at any moment the canoe might slip over its lip into nothingness. But these voyagers carry another sense, deep and steady, like a drumbeat beneath the surface of thought. They know that certain birds do not fly too far from land. When flocks begin to appear at a particular angle at dawn, when the shape of their flight, tight, purposeful, replaces the loose wandering of ocean birds, they mark it. They note the direction the birds are coming from in the morning and returning to at night. They know that certain clouds form over islands more than they do over open ocean. In the late afternoon, when the heat has risen and the air thickened, they watch for towering clouds that stand still, anchored by the warmth of land beneath them, while other clouds drift. They know that the color of the water changes subtly over submerged reefs and shallow lagoons, that the smell of the air shifts when land is nearby, carrying hints of soil and leaves and flowers. All of these signs, like the stars, are read and woven together in the navigator's mind. None of them alone would be enough. Together, they become a net of knowledge thrown across the apparently empty sea. The horizon remains a circle, but in the navigator's inner vision, it is crossed by threads, roads of star, wave, cloud, bird, ocean roads that ignore the visible edge and follow a deeper, unseen geography. The emotional journey moves slowly, gently, from unease to trust. At first, the open sea feels like exposure. But as we watch these voyagers move, day after day, night after night, guided by the breath of the waves and the slow turning of the sky, we begin to sense what they must have felt. Not abandonment, but accompaniment. The sky is not distant. It is a ceiling of signs. The ocean is not empty. It is a field of patterns. The canoe is not small. It is an island, complete, carrying within its wood and woven ropes the entire knowledge of a people's journeys. At last, after a long stretch of open water, the signs begin to gather. The swell beneath the canoe shifts, taking on a new, crosswise rhythm. The birds at dawn are more numerous, their flight more determined. In the late afternoon, a cloud tower blooms on the horizon and holds its place while the others wander. Night falls one more time. The navigator checks the stars, adjusts the course with a quiet confidence. The canoe glides through the darkness like a thought. At dawn, the horizon is no longer an unbroken circle. Far ahead, almost too faint to trust, there is a darker line between sea and sky, a slightly different texture in the light. the memory of green, where there should be only blue. As the sun lifts higher, the line thickens. It becomes a strip of land, then an arc of trees, then, at last, a coastline pale sand, dark rock, the pale smoke of fires rising in welcome. The land appears exactly where the stars said it would. The amazement is not thunderous, it is soft, a quiet satisfaction, like the last note of a song falling perfectly into place, a recognition that the ocean roads have been true. Time slips. We leave the canoe and its watchful navigator and drift forward, across years and centuries, toward a different shoreline. It is a modern beach now. Lights from houses blur the edge of night. Somewhere, a town hums, engines, voices, the electric buzz of a world that finds its way by different means. Above, the same sky stretches, the same star rivers, the same constellations that once traced routes across open water. They still pivot, unhurried, in their endless cycles. Marked by the moon, accompanied by planets, they continue their slow, patient turning. But few eyes seek directions in them now. Ships pass far offshore, their paths drawn by satellites and invisible signals. Airplanes cross the sky in straight, unthinking lines. Phones in pockets know where they are without any need to look up. On the sand, someone may notice Venus, bright in the evening, and name it idly as the evening star, without knowing that long ago, in another canoe, that same light was a crucial syllable in a sacred sentence of navigation. Where memory fades, the stars remain, the ocean remains, the roads are still there, worn but unseen. Beneath the silence of the night, a gentle wonder lingers, if we are quiet enough to feel it. Did those navigators truly defy the limit of the horizon? Did they challenge the edge of the world and win, stitching islands together across distances that should have been impossible? Or did they simply learn to listen more deeply, to trust a conversation that was already happening, between wave and star, between bird and cloud, between the patient movement of the heavens and the living body of the sea? Perhaps it was never meant to be one or the other. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen. The voices of those ancient wayfinders are not in museums or maps alone. They are in the murmuring swell, in the pattern of stars above any open water, in the knowledge that even when our tools fall silent, the world around us is still full of signs. As you drift towards sleep, imagine yourself once more beneath that immeasurably wide sky, in a small canoe on a dark, breathing ocean. The horizon is a circle, but you are not afraid of it. Above you, a familiar constellation tilts, pointing the way. Beneath you, the slow, steady rhythm of the swell whispers of land far beyond sight. The ocean roads are still there, ignoring the horizon, as always, and the night itself seems to carry you along them, softly, into the quiet harbors of your own dreams. The carved hill of forgotten constellations. It is said that there is a hill where the dawn arrives more slowly, as if the light itself is reluctant to disturb what lies sleeping there. We begin at the edge of that morning. Mist lingers low over the grass, clinging to the ground in thin, silver veils. The air is cool enough that each breath leaves a faint cloud, then disappears. The sky above the hill is a soft, washed-out blue, still half dreaming, the last trace of starlight fading as the pale sun prepares to rise. On the crest of the hill, ancient pillars stand in a rough circle. They are not tall like the later monuments of stone. They are modest, half buried in earth and grass, as if the land has been slowly swallowing them for a very long time. Their shapes are uneven, their tops chipped and broken. Together they resemble the teeth of an old jawbone, worn down by countless years of use. Each pillar is carved. Animals run along their sides, deer with slender legs, long-horned cattle, heavy-shouldered creatures that might be bears or aurochs. There are spirals and simple, star-like marks, eyes and hands and shapes that seem to hover between waking and dream. Many of the carvings are softened by time, their edges blurred, their details veiled in lichen and moss. A light breeze moves through the circle, stirring the grasses, brushing the stone with a sound so gentle it barely exists. It carries with it the faint scent of dust and forgotten rituals, of smoke that once rose here in twisting columns, but has long since blown away. The first question glows softly in the mind, like a coal left in an old fire, who gathered here, long before cities rose, to watch the sky in such a deliberate circle of stone. We walk slowly among the pillars, our steps dampened by dew. Birds call distantly from the hedges below, but the hilltop itself feels hushed, listening. In forgotten corners of the earth, places like this endure, where human intention still hangs in the air long after the voices that spoke it are gone. As we move between the stones, we begin to notice things. Here, a narrow notch cut into the top of a pillar frames a slender wedge of sky. If we stand in the right place and lean our head just so, we can imagine a star once rising perfectly within that small opening, a bright point that appeared there at a particular time of year, and nowhere else. On another pillar, an animal has been carved with unusual care. Its eyes are wide and alert, its head tilted upward. If we trace a line from its gaze to the heavens, we might find, or once have found, a cluster of stars arranged in a similar shape, a constellation now dim with age and shifting time. On the ground between the stones, almost hidden by grass, lies a ring of smaller rocks, barely raised above the soil. Their arc mirrors the curve of a pattern we can barely make out in the morning sky, a pale echo of a celestial design that once burned more brightly. Nothing here is exact, nothing is measured in numbers or angles, as we might measure them now, and yet, beneath the roughness, there is intention, a sense that those who raised these pillars were not placing them at random, they were paying attention. Whispers tell us that when this circle was young, the world around it was very different. There were no towers on the horizon, no lines of roads cutting the land, no cities glowing at night. There were only forests and rivers, plains and hills, migrating herds, and the narrow paths of people who followed them. The people who climbed this hill were still half nomadic. Their homes were light and movable. Their possessions were few. They knew the taste of hunger and the relief of sudden abundance. They knew how to read the tracks of animals in mud, how to listen for the first geese returning in spring, how to feel the promise of snow in the breath of the wind. Above all, they knew the sky. When there is no roof between you and the stars, no artificial light to drown them, the heavens are not a distant decoration, they are a presence. Every clear night, the same patterns return. The same river of pale light sweeps across the dark. The same clusters rise and set in their appointed seasons. It is said that these early watchers did not separate the sky from their stories. They saw animals up there, great stags, long-necked birds, curling serpents, bears turning slowly around an invisible pole. They saw hunters and fires and pathways. They saw in the wandering stars the steps of unseen gods, or the strange, unsteady hearts of the sky itself. And then, with hands that knew more of wood and bone than of stone, they decided to catch those stories on this hill. We drift gently backward in time now. The grass shortens under our feet, the lichen shrinks, the pillars grow clearer, their edges sharper, their carvings newly cut. The hill itself feels less lonely, its silence thinner. The air is colder in this earlier dawn, and the smoke of small fires can be seen coiling upward from shallow pits dug between the stones. People move quietly through the circle, wrapped in furs and woven cloth, their hair braided, their faces lined not only with age but with weather and long walking. They speak in low tones, but the language is one we cannot understand. We understand their gestures. An elder, with grey threaded through their hair, points to the sky where the last stars still shimmer. Their hand traces the outline of a shape above, then moves to the carving on a nearby pillar, perhaps a running deer or a horned beast. Younger faces follow the motion, eyes flicking from stone to sky and back again. Here, beneath the fading stars, a lesson is unfolding. The elder is tying the lights above to the figures around them, weaving a net of memory. This cluster of stars is this animal. When you see it rising low in the east, the herds are turning north. When you see it high overhead at midnight, the winter is near. When it disappears into the sunset, the salmon will return to the rivers. These are not abstract ideas. They are instructions for survival embedded in stories. Beneath the silence of the stones, we feel the urgency under the calm. If these patterns are forgotten, the group may miss the season to move, to hunt, to gather. So they carve them here, into pillars that will outlast any voice. As day fades into evening, Another scene appears. The fires in the shallow pits are lit again, their light flickering against the standing stones. Shadows tremble along the carvings, making the deer seem to move. The spirals seem to turn, the star-like marks to glitter. Above, the sky deepens to the rich blue of twilight, then to indigo, then to black. The first stars blink awake, faint at first, then sharp, clear, countless. The circle feels like the center of a vast, invisible dome. Tonight, the people are not looking for their usual constellations alone. They are watching for something more fleeting, a meteor shower. We see it come like rain made of fire, small streaks of light tearing briefly across the sky, leaving ghostly traces that vanish almost as soon as they appear. Some are small and quick, then gone. Others are longer, slower, as if something were gently drawing bright threads through the fabric of the night. For these early watchers, such nights must have felt astonishing. It is said that on such occasions, voices would rise, in chant, not loud, not frantic, but steady, rhythmic, like the beating of a distant drum. Perhaps they believed that the streaks were sparks from the celestial hearth, or messages from spirits moving between worlds. Perhaps they saw them as confirmations of their stories, the sky itself throwing embers down to bless the carvings made in its honor. The elders point upward, then again to the stones. Children trace the animals with their fingers, feeling the grooves while their eyes burn with reflections of the falling lights. The meteor shower will end, the carvings will remain. The hill becomes a place where earth and firmament exchange secrets, each side sending signs to the other in their own language. In the days and nights that follow, the circle continues to act as a meeting point. Sometimes it is nearly empty, the people away following herds or gathering roots in distant valleys. The stones stand alone under rain and wind, their carved animals watching the slow drift of clouds. Other times, the hill is busy. Fires burn. Songs ripple through the air like low, audible warmth. Stories are told of how a certain star once fell and became a stone that a hunter carries, of how an ancestor followed the pattern of lights to find a new river. Slowly, over seasons and generations, the circle itself becomes part of the story. It is not just a place where constellations are remembered. It is a constellation on the ground, a star map made of stone and earth. If someone travels far and returns, they stand within the ring and recount the skies they saw in distant lands. There, they might say, pointing to a pillar with a bird carved into it, the same shape flew above another hill, beyond a great forest. The group listens, and for a moment, the world feels both larger and more connected. Beneath the silence, this circle is doing something subtle. It is narrowing the distance between here and elsewhere, between now and then, between above and below. It is a kind of first observatory, though no one calls it that. A place where looking up is not an accident, but a ritual, where the act of paying attention has been given a home. Time, however, moves with its own unstoppable rhythm. We let the scenes fade, the fires dim, the voices grow softer and thinner. The people who learned the constellations here grow old, and their descendants move on, as all people do. New paths are walked, new shelters are raised in other places. The hill is left to its own thoughts. Grass grows, slowly at first, then in thick, waving sheets. Soil washed down from higher slopes collects in hollows around the pillars. Moss creeps up their sides, veiling the lower carvings. The sharp lines of the animals soften, their eyes closing under lichen. Above, the sky changes almost imperceptibly. Stars that once rose here at the equinox now appear a little to one side. Constellations tilt. Some bright lights fade, others brighten. The grand patterns are still there, but they are shifted, as if the great dome has turned slightly on a hidden axis. Where memory fades, the stars continue their slow procession. The circle of stone, tuned once to certain risings and settings, finds that its alignments no longer match as perfectly as they once did. The hill falls silent. We return now to the present hush, to the dawn with which we began. The grass is damp against our ankles. The pillars stand like worn teeth, jagged and quiet. No fires burn in the shallow pits. They are filled with soil and the ashes of long-vanished wood. No voices chant. No elders point to the sky. And yet, The carved animals still face outward. Even worn and veiled, their postures are clear, heads lifted, eyes turned toward the horizon. They gaze at a sky that has shifted slightly, but not completely. Many of the constellations they once echoed can still be found, if we look long enough. The same pale river of stars still flows overhead on clear nights, though its brightness is dimmed by our own lights elsewhere. Beneath the silence, the hill remembers. We may stand here now as strangers, without the old stories, without the urgent need to follow herds or read seasons in the stars. To us, the pillars may look like remnants of some forgotten ritual whose meaning has dissolved into dust. But if we close our eyes for a moment, we can almost feel the weight of all those nights when the circle was alive with watching. All those breaths held as a certain star appeared in a notch of stone. All those quiet exhalations of relief when the sky behaved as expected. Perhaps this place was never meant to control the stars. Perhaps it was simply a shrine to their constancy, a way of saying, "We see you, we remember you, we will carve your shapes into our world, so that even when clouds hide you, even when we are gone, your outlines will remain." Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen. As the sun finally lifts above the horizon, the pillars glow briefly in its first light, their carvings caught and then released. The hilltop warms. The breeze stirs again, carrying away the last cool breath of night. We leave the circle as we found it, quiet, humble, enduring. The thought that lingers is a gentle one, that this carved hill may have been a first observatory, not in the sense of instruments and measurements, but in the sense of attention and reverence, a place where early people chose, quite deliberately, to stand between earth and sky and honor the fleeting patterns that once guided them through the dark. The stars above move on, indifferent, yet faithful. The stones below hold their stories in silence. And you, somewhere between, drift slowly toward sleep, carrying with you the image of carved animals facing a vast, turning sky, reminders that long before we named the constellations with modern tongues, someone stood on a lonely hill and whispered their shapes into stone, hoping they would not be forgotten. It is said that there was once a city born not only from stone and earth, but from a single line of light. We arrive there in the quiet just before morning, when the air is cool and still, and the world is holding its breath. Before us stretches a wide avenue of stone, straight and unwavering, a pale ribbon running between sleeping walls and darkened courtyards. The houses that line it are low and silent. Doorways are closed, hearths are embers, and even the birds seem reluctant to disturb the hush. At the far end of the avenue, where the city rises toward its sacred heart, a temple waits. It stands upon a raised platform, a terrace of steps and carved balustrades, its facade facing precisely toward the unseen horizon beyond. In the dimness, the temple glows only faintly, its relief soft, its pillars still wrapped in shadow. Yet there is a sense, almost like a feeling in the chest, that the entire city is leaning, very gently, toward this place. Every street, every courtyard, every open plaza seems to be turned, in some quiet way, in the same direction. The first thin line of dawn appears. Far off, beyond the city walls, the horizon lightens from black to deep blue to a faint, tender gray. The sky begins to blush with clay red and pale gold. Shadows soften, then stretch. A cool breeze moves along the avenue, stirring dust, carrying with it the smell of stone that has not yet been warmed. We watch. Slowly, the sun's upper edge pushes itself above the rim of the earth. Its light, at first, is not a flood but a blade, a single narrow beam that slips between distant hills and pours into the waiting channel of the city's main avenue. It travels straight as a thought, straight as a prayer, threading itself through outer gate, inner plaza, and final set of carved pillars. For a brief, breathless moment, that beam pierces the central doorway of the temple and runs inward, illuminating a chamber hidden deep within its stone body. Inside, a sanctuary that has been waiting all night, perhaps all year, fills with gold. The city, still half asleep, seems to awaken all at once. Our first question is gentle and reverent, spoken almost in a whisper. Why would builders design an entire city as if it were a single instrument, tuned so carefully to the breath of dawn? Whispers tell us that when this city was first laid out, its builders did not begin with walls or houses, nor with markets or palaces. They began with the sky. Long before the first foundation stone was carved, sacred watchers stood on this ground, when it was still bare earth and scattered rocks, and watched where the sun rose. Day after day, season after season, they noted how the point of sunrise crept along the horizon, sliding southward, then slowly back again. They watched at midwinter, when the sun climbed reluctantly, and at midsummer, when it sprang up with eager brightness. They watched at the balance days, when night and day shared the world equally. It is said that they marked these events not on scrolls, but on the land itself. A staff planted in the earth to cast a shadow, a row of stones aligned to a particular sunrise, a shallow trench pointing to a distant notch in the hills. They saw how the sun's path across the sky was not random but cyclical, and how certain positions, certain mornings returned with patient regularity. Only then did they begin to dream of a city. We drift down the avenue as if watching those early plans unfold. There are no finished houses yet, only lines drawn with cords, stakes hammered into soil, rough outlines of where walls will rise. At the center of it all stands a simple marker, a stub of stone where the heart of the city will be. Architects and priests move around it like stars around a hidden axis. They measure shadows at dawn and midday. They return year after year to the same point, waiting for the sun to reach the precise angle that confirms their imagined alignment. A few days too early, the light misses. A few days too late, it falls at the wrong tilt. But on a chosen morning, perhaps an equinox, perhaps a date sacred to their myths, the sun's ray strikes exactly where they hoped it would. From that moment, the city's direction is set. Streets are drawn like spokes radiating from that first line. Plazas open where the light will spill and pool. The grand avenue is marked out like the neck of a long stone instrument, tuned to one note, the rising sun at its appointed time. The city begins to grow, not outward from a random center, but along that invisible thread between earth and sky. We drift through its growth, as if watching seasons pass in a single breath. Walls rise, their stones fitted so tightly that shadows barely find a place to rest between them. Houses take form, their doorways all opening toward inner courtyards, their windows narrow and deep. Markets appear, where traders will one day lay out baskets of grain and jars of oil in the shade. Yet through every stage of this building, the avenue remains clear, its line protected. No one is allowed to obstruct it. No wall crosses it. No house spills into its space. It is kept open and straight, a corridor of air and light that runs like a quiet promise from the outer edge of the city to the temple at its core. Within the temple, the care is even more delicate. Inner chambers are laid out not merely for function, but for alignment. A central hall is oriented so that its axis matches the path of dawn light. The sanctuary beyond is positioned at a distance and height calculated by patient observation, so that the sun's ray, on that single chosen morning, will fall not on the floor or the wall, but on a particular relief, perhaps a carved mountain, perhaps a figure of a god, perhaps a symbol of the king's authority. It is here, in these shadowed rooms, that the city reveals its deeper intent. By day, torches flicker along the painted walls, illuminating reliefs that speak of cosmic oceans and sacred mountains, of the sun's daily journey across the heavens and its nightly plunge into the underworld. There are boats carved into stone, bearing deities across celestial waters. There are mountains rising from swirling waves, haunts of gods and ancestors. In one panel, the city itself is shown as a small, ordered island floating upon the primeval sea. At its center, the temple rises like a miniature mountain, and from its peak, a ray of light stretches upward, touching the sun disk above. The message is simple and profound. This place is meant to be a bridge. It is said that in this city, time was not only counted in days and harvests, but in moments when sky and stone embraced. There were festivals anchored not to the arbitrary decision of rulers, but to precise celestial events. On certain mornings, people would gather along the avenue long before dawn, filling the plazas with a soft murmur of anticipation. Vendors might bring bread and sweet drink. Children would be pulled close, so they would not be lost in the crowds. Musicians would stand ready with flutes and drums, their instruments quiet until the right moment. At the far end of the avenue, the temple tower looked out over them all, still dark, its interior chambers waiting in silence. As the first glimmer of sun appeared, the murmur would still. A hush would settle over the stones. People would turn their faces toward the horizon as one, their breath visible in the cool air. The light would move through the outer gate, casting long, dramatic shadows against its symbols. Across the plaza, turning dust motes into tiny stars. Between the pillars of the temple's outer court, making their reliefs stand out in sharp, golden profile. Then, through the central doorway, inward, within the sanctuary, where only a few might be allowed to stand, the ray would strike, not by chance, but by design. It would wash over the carved cosmic mountain, or touch the face of a statue, or halo the throne where a new king sat waiting to be crowned. The city, in that instant, felt complete, like an instrument, played only once in full. All of its architecture, all of its measurements, all of its careful alignments, culminated in that single, glowing note, stone and sun in harmony. The emotional journey for those who watched must have been complex. At first, curiosity. Will it truly happen? Will the light find its way, as the elders say? Then, when it does, a deep sense of wonder, perhaps even relief, that their world is still in tune with the heavens, that the stories carved on the temple walls are not empty, but mirrored in the very behavior of the sky. Yet these moments were rare. Most days, the city was simply a city. The sun rose a little to one side of the perfect line, or a little beyond it. Its light still warmed the stones, still filled the courtyards, still cast shadows in intricate angles, but it did not penetrate the temple in quite the same way. People went about their work, grinding grain, shaping pottery, weighing goods in the market, sweeping doorways, telling small stories by the well. Even so, the memory of those rare alignments lived on, like a quiet pulse beneath daily life. Architects and priests would continue to watch the sky, making minor adjustments when new buildings were added. They would stand on rooftops at dawn, checking angles, feeling for any subtle drift that might threaten the precision of their city's heart. To keep such an alignment over many years requires patience bordering on devotion. The sun's path shifts, the air distorts. Tiny errors can accumulate, stones can settle, walls can lean. Yet they persisted, anchoring their years not only to the count of days but to the recurrence of those luminous mornings. It is said that they were willing to wait months, sometimes an entire cycle of seasons, for a single shaft of light to confirm that the covenant between their city and the sky still held. This patience is its own kind of prayer. Time, however, moves in broader arcs than any single alignment. We let the centuries pass, watching the city age. Walls crack, roofs collapse, reigning dynasties fall and are replaced. New gods are absorbed into old stories, old names are spoken less often. The great avenue sees processions of triumph and processions of mourning. Then, slowly, fewer processions at all. One day, the festival is held with fewer spectators. Another day, the priests argue over the precise moment the sun should be considered risen. Later still, someone forgets to teach the next generation how to read the shadows properly, how to stand at the exact point where the temple and the sun once greeted one another like old friends. Sand begins to drift against the base of walls. Grass pushes through cracks in the paving. The sacred tower loses a piece of its carved facade to an earthquake or a careless reuse of stone in humbler houses. The avenue, once swept for ceremonies, becomes just another road, then a path, then a faint line under dust. Beneath the silence, the alignment remains, ghost-like. The stones have not entirely forgotten their tuning. On certain mornings, if the air is clear and no clouds intervene, the sun still traces the old path. The beam still threads through gate and plaza. It still reaches the main doorway of the temple, though debris now blocks its way, and the sanctuary beyond stands empty. We return to the present. The temple stands in partial shadow, its reliefs worn, its colors faded to suggestions. The sun is higher now, indifferent, casting its light evenly over ruin and living town alike. The avenue, what is left of it, is crossed by modern footsteps, by carts, by ordinary errands. The moment of perfect alignment has passed into memory, into stories, then into silence. And yet, if you were to stand on that avenue at just the right dawn, careful and still, you might see a hint of what once was. A brief line of brightness sliding along the stones, touching the face of a forgotten carving, then moving on. Perhaps it was never meant to be more than that. Perhaps the builders knew, even as they set the first stone, that their city could not truly hold the sun, could not capture it forever. What they could do was bind their own hearts, and the heart of their community, to the calm certainty of its return, to say, "We choose to live in rhythm with this light, to let it define our mornings, our rituals, our sense of belonging in a vast and turning world." Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen. The voice of this city is one of quiet defiance against chaos, not in conquering the sky, but in aligning gently with it. Its avenue, its temple, its carved walls were all part of a single gesture, a single long breath drawn toward the east. As you drift toward sleep, you may carry with you the image of that first dawn, a wide stone road, a waiting temple, and a single beam of gold threading through the heart of a city that dared to believe that its own fragile order could be woven, however briefly, into the ancient, patient certainty of the rising sun. It is said that in an old empire of tiled roofs and quiet courtyards, night could fall even at midday. We begin in a palace court, deep inside high walls, where the world has grown hushed and small. Lanterns hang from carved beams, their light soft and amber, swaying slightly in a breath of cool air. Between them, the sky is a dark, still lake, holding a pale, almost full moon like a coin laid upon black silk. Stone paving lies beneath our feet, worn smooth by generations of footsteps. Pools reflect a few trembling lanterns and the far-off shimmer of stars. Bamboo whispers in one corner, leaves brushing against one another, with the sound of distant rain. Into this stillness, a messenger arrives. His sandals slap softly against the stone, breath quick but held in check by the weight of where he is. He passes under the gaze of stone dragons and painted guardians, crosses beneath an archway marked with faded vermilion characters. In his hands he carries no scroll, no sealed edict, only a message shaped entirely of spoken words. At the entrance of the inner court, he kneels, forehead to the cold floor, and the words leave him like a small, heavy stone dropped into deep water. The moon will vanish, lanterns flicker. Somewhere in the shadows, a folded fan stops mid-motion. In the deep night of this ancient empire, sky and throne are tied together by invisible threads, and the disappearance of the moon is not a simple shadow. It is a statement, a warning, a whispered decree from heaven itself. Beneath the silence that follows, a question drifts like smoke through the still air. Can a ruler truly hold power if the sky appears to disapprove? Whispers tell us that in this land, heaven was not a distant abstraction. It was an order, a pattern, a breath that moved from stars to mountains to rivers to throne. The emperor was not merely a man, he was the axis between above and below, the point where celestial will met human realm. When the rains came as expected, when harvests were rich, when no comets broke the sky and no dragons of darkness swallowed the sun or moon, it was said that the ruler walked in harmony with the heavens. When strange stars appeared, when the sun dimmed at noon, when the moon bled red and disappeared, it was feared that heaven was withdrawing its favor. In that fear, a single shadow could shake a dynasty. And yet, not everyone in the palace trembled when the messenger spoke. High above the court, beyond the tiled roofs and painted beams, a tower rises not tall by our measures, but tall enough to lift its watchers above the fretful lights of the city. On its platform, instruments of wood and bronze stand in patient rows, sighting tubes, simple gnomons, carved circles marked with careful lines. Nearby, a low table holds bamboo slips bound with cord, tortoise shells cracked and inked with fine characters. Here, in this observatory of quiet breath and open sky, robed astronomer-priests have been watching for nights and nights, counting the steps of the moon as it walks its path among the stars. They are not surprised. We drift to them now, Just as they step back from their instruments, their faces lined not with panic, but with the long fatigue of concentration. Their robes move softly in the night air, sleeves trailing like banners of ink against the dimness. One of them picks up a bamboo slip, the surface smoothed and polished by many hands. On it, in tiny, precise brushstrokes, a pattern of days has been recorded: full moons, dark moons, positions of wandering planets, unusual stars that flared and faded. Among these marks, a small notation has been added for this night, a sign that the moon, at just such an hour, will be touched by the Earth's own shadow. They have seen such things before. Generations of their teachers have traced the cycles of light and darkness, counting how many months pass between one eclipse and the next, how the moon's path sometimes brings it into shadow and then away again. Theirs is a knowledge carved slowly out of the firm, resistant stone of uncertainty, polished by repetition, by the patient comparison of omen and observation. To others, an eclipse is sudden wrath. To them, it is part of a rhythm. But their knowledge is not merely a private comfort. In this palace, it is a shield. It is said that long ago, before such watchers grew confident, an unexpected eclipse could shake the empire to its foundations. Court records speak of night falling at midday, of birds returning to their nests in confusion, of people beating drums and brass pots to frighten away the dragon that was believed to be devouring the moon. In those days, the emperor might fall to his knees in fear, offering hurried sacrifices, confessing failings in governance that perhaps had nothing to do with celestial mechanics at all. But over time, a different understanding crept into the cracks of that fear. Astronomer-priests, sky readers, calculation makers, diviners of patterns began to see that these events followed rules. They traced cycles that repeated after a certain number of months, enough to overlap with the lives of a few careful observers. They saw that the dragon's hunger, if dragon it was remarkably regular. Knowledge became a small island in a sea of awe. Now, in this palace night, the men from the tower have already given their warning. Days ago, bamboo slips were sent in silence to those who needed to know. Tortoise shells, once used for burning divination cracks, lie inked with sequences not of random questions, but of recorded eclipses, laid out like the segments of a long, coiling serpent. The messenger in the courtyard brings not revelation, but confirmation. The emperor has been told. We follow the message inward. The palace changes as we pass through it. Outer courts are large and open, built for processions and public ceremonies. Inner halls grow narrower, quieter, their beams painted with dragons, cranes, clouds. Curtains of fine silk hang like pale mist between carved pillars. In a private chamber, the emperor sits beneath a canopy embroidered with sun and moon, their golden threads dull in the lamplight. Scrolls lie rolled beside him, their ends capped with jade. A low table holds freshly poured tea, now gone cold. Attendants stand, with heads bowed, eyes lowered. The astronomer-priests have already spoken with him, in tones measured as carefully as their observations. They have told him that the moon will vanish. Yes, they have told him when it will begin, how long it will last, and when it will return. They have also told him something more delicate, what it might mean. In this empire, celestial events are woven into the fabric of legitimacy. Comets and eclipses are not merely phenomena. They are commentaries, footnotes written by heaven in the margins of history. A sudden darkness can be read as condemnation. A rare alignment can be read as approval. But readings can be softened. Interpretations can be guided. Your Majesty, a priest might murmur, the eclipse will occur, but it falls within the expected cycle. It is not out of season, nor accompanied by other ill omens. It may be taken as a reminder of heaven's vastness. With proper ritual, its sharpness may be blunted. In this way, those who chart the stars stand gently between heaven and throne, their words wrapping around the raw fact of shadow, like silk around a blade. When the time draws near, the palace moves from private preparation to public ritual. The great hall is opened, its high doors swung wide to admit the night. Bronze lamps burn along the walls, their flames steady, their light pooling over carved dragons that coil along the beams. At the far end of the hall, A raised platform holds the imperial throne, lacquered, inlaid, built to suggest the meeting of mountain and cloud. The emperor enters in robes of deep, star-marked blue, a crown of weighted strings of jade falling along his temples. To those who watch from below, he seems calm, his steps slow and measured. They cannot see the small tightness in his hand, the faint line at the corner of his mouth. Outside, common people gather in courtyards and streets, eyes turned upward. In some places, as tradition demands, drum towers are readied, their skins stretched, sticks held in waiting hands. Children are told to stay close. Old stories rise again, of beasts of darkness that swallow sun and moon, of the need to shout, to clang, to insist that the swallowed light be released. Above all of them, in the velvet heaviness of the sky, the moon shines full and bright for now. The astronomer-priests take their places at the edge of the hall, where they can see both the emperor and the sky. They have brought no bamboo slips tonight. All the counting has already been done. Slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, a small bite appears at the moon's edge. To an unprepared eye, it might be nothing, a cloud, a trick of water in the air. But they know. They see the shadow creep across its face, a dark curve that grows and grows, turning the bright disk into a slender, dying crescent. In the great hall, a herald cries out in a voice that echoes like a gong. Heaven speaks. The emperor stands. He turns toward the open doors, toward the sky. Officials fall to their knees behind him, caps and crowns lowered, sleeves spread like fans against the floor. Outside, beyond the palace walls, the first drums begin to beat slow at first, then faster, a rolling, oceanic thunder, as if the people themselves are trying to shake the sky awake. The emperor raises his hands. Ritual words spill from his lips, practiced phrases that have been used for centuries, confessions of human imperfection, pledges to correct misrule, acknowledgments that even the highest throne sits beneath the gaze of something greater. He speaks of balancing the scales, of easing the suffering of the people, of honoring heaven's will. To those listening, it may seem as if he is persuading the shadows themselves, but in the priests' minds, the timeline is already inscribed. They know when the moon will be completely covered, when its face will glow that strange, blood-tinged grey, when the shadow will begin to soften and slide away. They are watching two stories at once, the visible drama of terror and supplication, and the invisible clockwork of celestial motion. As the eclipse deepens, the world changes. Light drains from the courtyard, then from the hall. Lantern flames look suddenly small and fragile. Colors flatten. The air feels colder, as if some vast mouth has opened overhead and is drawing breath. The moon hangs dim and strange, marked by the earth's own shadow. On the streets beyond, some people wail and beat gongs, eyes squeezed shut. Others stare in uneasy fascination. A child clings to a parent's sleeve and whispers, "Will it come back?" Inside, the emperor continues his recitation. He bows, not too deeply, not like a common man, but enough to acknowledge the presence of something above him. His voice shakes once, perhaps from genuine fear, perhaps from the weight of so many eyes upon him. The priests murmur, subtle, among themselves. The middle has passed, one notes. The shadow will begin to recede. They know that, in a little while, the drums will be said to have worked, the prayers to have been heard. The emperor's posture of humility will be remembered in the official records. The sting of the omen will be written in softer ink. Later, scribes will take up their brushes and carve this night into history. On the 3rd year of the reign, in the 8th month, an eclipse of the moon occurred. The Son of Heaven, moved with reverence, examined his conduct, and tended to the welfare of the people. Thereafter, the realm was peaceful. What might have been taken as a sign of condemnation is instead folded into a story of responsiveness, of a ruler who listens when heaven whispers. This, too, is a kind of power. Slowly, almost shyly, light returns. At the moon's edge, a thin, bright line appears. The darkness begins to peel away, sliding off like a veil loosened by unseen hands. The drums outside grow erratic, then falter, then stop, as people notice the change and let relief wash over them. In the great hall, The emperor's voice trails off. He falls silent, and so do those around him. Together they watch as the moon resumes its familiar shape, pale and serene, as if nothing at all has happened. The sharp chill in the air softens. Lantern light seems warmer again. Color creeps back into robes and banners. For a moment, there is no speech, only an exhale. A long, communal breath released by palace and city alike. Beneath the silence that follows, many thoughts may be living. Some say, our drums and prayers have saved the moon. Others think, the emperor's piety has restored harmony. A few, rarer minds, might murmur inwardly, it ended when the star readers said it would end. The astronomer-priests exchange small, knowing glances. They, too, are relieved not because they doubted the eclipse would pass, but because each new fulfillment of the pattern confirms both their learning and their delicate role. They are translators. They take the stark language of shadow and light and render it into phrases that the court can bear, that the emperor can use, that the people can live with. Did they defy celestial judgment tonight? Or did they simply stand between heaven and throne, softening what might otherwise have cut too deeply? Later, the great hall empties. Officials withdraw, their footsteps fading into distant corridors. Servants snuff out some of the lamps, leaving only a few to flicker in the vastness. The emperor retires to his chambers, his robes exchanged for simpler cloth, the weight of jade removed from his brow. On the tower, the astronomer-priests return to their bamboo slips. They note the time of the eclipse's start and end, the color the moon seemed to wear, any unusual stars that accompanied the event. They compare tonight's marks with those of past centuries, tracing the repeating spiral of the sky's behavior through the dust of many rains. Beneath the silence, a strange tenderness hangs in the air. The moon, high now and almost luminous, glides along its path, as if unaware of the anxiety it has stirred. It does not mark emperors' names. It does not favor one city over another. It simply moves, in accordance with forces that were old, long before any throne was carved. The palace sleeps. Lanterns gutter and go out. Courtyards darken. The echo of the drums has long since faded from the streets. Only the memories of those who watched remain, the image of a bitten moon, the feeling of light draining from the world, the relief of its return. Perhaps it was never meant to be found. This balance the sky readers sought. Perhaps the heavens do not truly approve or disapprove, but simply move. Perhaps the real act of defiance is not against celestial judgment itself, but against the fear of it, the human choice to stand in the path of shadow with eyes open, to understand what can be understood, and to tell gentler stories where harsher ones once ruled. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen. As you drift towards sleep, you might imagine the quiet court once more, lanterns swaying, bamboo murmuring, the moon above, round and calm, as if the whole drama of its vanishing never happened. Somewhere between that indifferent light and the fragile world of kings and messengers, a few robed figures watch and write, measuring shadows on tortoise shell and bamboo, trying to make the darkness a little less frightening. The night wraps itself around the palace, and around you, like a slow, soft cloak. The sky moves on, the moon continues its ancient path, and the story of an emperor who spoke with eclipses fades into a gentle hush, leaving only the distant, steady glow of a world that is, in the end, always turning back toward light. It is said that on a certain dry hill, where the wind rarely carries more than dust and the faint scent of time, the earth once learned to look back at the sky. We begin there, in the gentle depth of night. The hill is crowned by a low, circular building. Its roof has long since fallen inward, leaving only a ring of walls embracing the open air. The stones are pale and rough, flecked with lichen the color of faded copper. Cracks vein their surfaces like dry riverbeds. Along the inner wall, a series of carved niches look outward and upward, each one framing a precise slice of the heavens. Some face the horizon where certain stars rise, others point higher, toward paths walked by wandering lights that are neither star nor moon. Together they form a silent chorus of windows, an unfinished circle of gazes turned skyward. Night has settled soft and clear. There is no smoke, no city glow, no lanterns to dim the firmament. Above, the stars burn with a quiet intensity, countless points of white and blue, scattered like seeds across the deep, dusk sky blue. The Milky Way spills overhead in an oceanic band, a spill of powdered light. In the center of the circular floor lies an old stone instrument, half buried in dust. Its shape is simple, a shallow disc, a raised edge, a broken pointer once meant to cast a shadow. Its markings are faint but ordered rings, lines, small notches around the rim. To the casual eye, they might seem like scratches from the passing of time, but if you look longer, they begin to speak of sequence, angles, repetition, like the ghost of a number song. Beneath the silence, a question rises slowly, the way heat rises from sun-baked rock. Who once stood here, night after night, turning the sky into tables and gentle equations, believing that by understanding the rhythm of the stars, they could free human life from blind chance. The ruined stones do not answer. The stars above say nothing, though they shine like letters in an unread script. So we let time loosen its grip, and we drift backward. Where memory fades for us, it sharpens for the hill. The broken roof knits itself together. Fallen stones rise and return to their places. Dust pulls back into mortar. The circular building becomes whole again. A low, domed structure with an open oculus at its center, a deliberate eye looking straight into the sky. The niches along the wall are fresh and sharp, their edges uncrumbled, each one carefully angled. Torches burn in brackets between them, their flames sending gold ripples up the stone. The floor is swept clean, marked only by the faint circles and straight lines of instruments placed and moved and placed again. In the center, the stone disc is intact. Its pointer, a slender rod of metal set upright, casts a clear shadow in the lamplight, sharp as ink. Around its edge, symbols and numbers are carved deep and dark, their grooves filled with charcoal or colored paste. Beside it lies a second device, a circle of wood marked with degrees, aligned to the north, with sighting arms that can be lifted and turned to follow particular stars. Into this space, scholars arrive. They come wrapped in flowing robes, cloaks, or layered garments, depending on the season. Some carry oil lamps, others bring wooden cases of scrolls, wax tablets, or folded sheets. Their steps are careful. They speak quietly, if at all, as if they are entering a sanctuary rather than a workshop. Their faces are marked by sleepless nights, by study, by years spent squinting at tiny symbols and distant lights. Yet in their eyes, there is a kind of softness, a patient curiosity, a trust in something beyond themselves. The observatory is not a place of spectacle. It is a place of waiting. Whispers tell us that long before these watchers climbed this hill, people already feared and adored the sky. They saw comets as swords or dragons, eclipses as devouring beasts, the wandering planets as restless gods who refused to stay in their allotted places among the stars. Every unexpected light, every strange dimming was taken as omen, good or ill, often ill. Life below felt small, and the heavens above felt vast and unpredictable, a theater of moods impossible to understand. But in forgotten corners of the earth, a different impulse slowly took root. Some began to watch not only in awe, but with attention. They noticed that certain stars rose at the same places on the horizon each year, heralding floods or harvests. They saw that the moon's phases followed a rhythm, that eclipses, though frightening, were not entirely without pattern. They realized that the wandering planets might trace repeatable paths, looping and backtracking in ways that, if not simple, were at least consistent. From that realization grew places like this, observatories whose walls were not for defense, but for focus, temples not to demand favor from the gods, but to listen more carefully to the sky's own language. In this hilltop circle, the sky is being turned into silent numbers. We watch the scholars at work. One stands at a niche that frames the eastern horizon, a sighting rod braced against the stone. He aligns it with a bright star just beginning to rise, its light trembling slightly in the thick air. Another adjusts the wooden circle at the center, turning its arms until they point to the same star, then calling out an angle in a low, clear voice. A third sits beside the stone instrument, ready with a brush and ink, recording the numbers onto a scroll. Her hand moves with practiced steadiness, lines neat, characters small and even. She notes the date, marked by moon and season, perhaps by rain year and festival. They work like this for hours, barely shifting their feet. From time to time, one of them extinguishes a lamp so that the starlight becomes clearer. Another relights it when they need to see the marks on a device. The observatory breathes in light and out again, lamplight and starlight mingling like two kinds of thought. Beneath the silence, there is a shared conviction, though no one speaks it aloud, that the cosmos is not chaos, but a kind of great, breathing harmony. Each recorded position, each measured angle, is an act of faith in that harmony. They do not yet have our language for ellipses or gravity. They do not speak of inclinations and orbital planes. Instead, they talk of cycles and spheres, of heavenly music, of balance and correspondence. Their mathematics is sometimes tangled with their myths, their numbers sometimes woven into prayers, but still they count, still they measure. Night after night, year after year, they turn the slow wheel of observation. Some believe that in a place like this, the sky was not seen as an enemy, but as a teacher. The scholars here know that human life is buffeted by forces beyond control: storms, sickness, war, the whims of those in palaces and strongholds. Down in the city below, markets rise and fall, borders shift, and fortunes turn with the roll of a dice or the rumor of a distant battle. Up here, those same scholars watch lights that move with patient repetition. A planet may wander, but it does not wander without pattern. It loops, it pauses, it retreats, it advances, but always in accordance with a rhythm that, though intricate, is not random. The moon returns to fullness. The sun meets the same stars again, after a long, careful circuit. To chart these motions is to carve out a small space of predictability inside a world that often feels like one long, unbroken accident. And so they spend years tracing a single planet's wandering arc. We see them through seasons. In winter, wrapped in heavier robes, their breath steaming in the cold as they lean over instruments whose metal has grown stiff. In summer, sweat beads on their foreheads as insects hum around the lamplight, yet they do not swat them away. Their attention remains fixed on a bright point, slowly sliding along a constellation's edge. Sometimes they are wrong. A predicted conjunction occurs a day early or late. A planet appears slightly higher than expected. They do not despair. They unroll older scrolls, compare numbers, adjust their tables. Quiet conversations unfold, filled not with blame but with curiosity. Where did we assume too much? Where did we round too carelessly? How can we listen more precisely? In this way, they refine their maps. The observatory becomes a sanctuary of patient thought. Outside, history passes in fits and starts. A new ruler takes the throne. A drought thins the river. A distant province rebels. Traders arrive with stories of other lands and other skies, bringing news of eclipses seen from far away, of strange stars unknown to the local watchers. Inside, beneath the dome, the pace is different. Scrolls accumulate bundles of bamboo slips, stacks of parchment or papyrus, wooden tablets still smelling faintly of resin. Each contains columns of figures, dates, and symbols. Some are copied from older texts, preserving the wisdom of those who observed from other hills, other towers, long ago. Others are new, born from this place alone. We watch as one scholar unrolls a scroll so long that it spills over the edge of the table and onto the floor. On it, a single planet's positions are recorded across decades, perhaps generations. The path it has traced through the zodiac seems at once complicated and gentle, a chain of numbers that snakes across time like a faint, ink-drawn river. He runs his finger along the lines, lips moving silently as he examines the pattern. Then he lifts his eyes to the sky, where that same planet, small and bright, hangs above the horizon, precisely where the latest line says it should be. The satisfaction that fills him is quiet, almost shy. He has not conquered anything. He has simply aligned his understanding with what is. Whispers tell us that from places like this, predictions began to seep into the wider world. Not prophecies in the sense of grand, dramatic announcements, but subtle anticipations, when certain stars would rise at dusk, when a wandering light would meet another, when the moon would hide the sun. With these predictions, farmers timed their planting, sailors chose their departures. Temple rites were aligned with celestial events in a way that seemed to affirm the stories told inside. In some courts, rulers asked for these calculations to be wrapped in the cloth of omen, to be presented as messages from the gods. The scholars complied, translating their silent numbers into careful words that spoke both of inevitability and counsel. At such a time, a red star will hover in the east. It might be wise to show mercy. Or, the meeting of these two lights may be taken as a sign of beginning, perhaps the founding of a new temple, a new law, a new era. Beneath the surface, however, the sanctuary on the hill remained what it had always been, a place where human attention stretched itself toward the vastness above, seeking not advantage alone, but understanding. Where memory fades now, it once burned clear and steady, but even the most patient watchers cannot halt the slow weathering of time. We let the centuries turn again. New generations of scholars climb the hill. Their robes are cut differently, their languages shift, their instruments slowly become more precise or, in some ages, cruder, as knowledge is lost and later relearned. Floods wash away low-lying parts of the city. Wars tear at its gates. Fires leap through its streets. Empires rise and fall. In one age, a library burns, and with it, shelves of carefully copied tables. In another, a new faith distrusts old practices, and the observatory is left unattended. The dome develops cracks, the roof is neglected, the wooden instruments warp and rot. A storm finally tears away part of the ceiling. A later earthquake does the rest. The scholars' scrolls are scattered, used to wrap goods, line chests, or simply crumble into dust. Their names, once noted with homage on the first lines of their works, fade and vanish. Perhaps a few survive as half-remembered figures in later chronicles. It is said there was once a sage who could predict the returning of a certain star, but the place that anchored their gaze slowly empties. Its roof collapses, its floor fills with leaves and drifting sand. Lizards sun themselves on the warm niches where once sighting rods braced against stone. The pointer on the central instrument snaps. Its broken piece is carried away in someone's hand, perhaps valued only for its metal. We return to the night with which we began. The observatory is now a quiet shell. The roof is gone, exposing the ring of walls to the open sky. The carved niches remain, though softened and chipped. The stone instrument lies half buried in dust, its markings faint but not entirely erased. No lamps burn here now. No voices murmur measurements. No one bends over scrolls, squinting in lamplight. And yet, overhead, the stars are still fluent. They follow the same deep, slow laws they always have. The planets still wander along their tilted paths, looping and pausing. The moon still waxes and wanes, still sometimes slips into shadow. The sun still returns to the same constellations after its long circuits, marking years and seasons. Beneath the silence, you can almost feel the echo of the old attention, a kind of residue of care that lingers in places where many thoughts have been carefully gathered. The hill remembers the weight of footsteps at midnight, the way long-robed figures once stood at its center, heads tilted back, eyes reflecting the sky. The niches remember the feel of sighting rods pressed into their corners. The stones remember the touch of hands tracing carved numbers, the small sound of brushes tapping the edges of inkstones. Perhaps nothing of their work remains on paper. Perhaps their tables and diagrams have been overwritten, superseded, forgotten. But the act itself, the long, humble patience of watching, measuring, revising, has not vanished. It has moved on, from observatory to observatory, culture to culture, age to age, wearing new faces, new tools, new languages of number. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen. Tonight, the hilltop is empty. Yet if you stand within the ring of walls and look up, you may feel, if only faintly, that you are not entirely alone. Somewhere between your gaze and the stars lies the memory of those who once believed that by understanding the rhythm of the heavens, they could loosen the grip of blind chance on their lives. They did not conquer the sky. They did something quieter, and perhaps more beautiful. They joined it, briefly, in a shared language of pattern and patience. As you drift towards sleep, you might imagine yourself there, in the center of that ruined circle, bare feet on cool stone, head tipped back to receive the starlight. Around you, the dark niches frame pieces of sky like unwritten pages. Above you, constellations move with unhurried grace, indifferent and yet strangely welcoming. The numbers are silent now, but their song continues folded into the turning of the world, into the slow breathing of the cosmos, into the gentle, repeating patterns that rock you, softly, toward rest. Longer feels like something above you, but something you are lying inside of. We begin in such a place. There are no stone cities here, no towers, no terraces, no lanterns burning in distant windows, only a wide, open land, a desert, perhaps, or a high plain where the air grows thin and cold after sunset. The ground is a tapestry of sand and rock, muted to silver by moonless dark. The horizon is a soft, low curve in every direction, as if the earth has folded itself into a shallow bowl to catch the sky. At the center of that bowl, a small campfire breathes its last. Its flames have melted down to embers, faint and red, pulsing quietly like a heart that has decided to rest but not yet fully sleep. A ring of stones cradles the warmth, holding it in place against the encroaching chill. Smoke rises in a lazy, translucent column and then disappears into the vastness. Around the fire, people lie on their backs, cloaks wrapped around them, faces turned upward. Their eyes are open, but their bodies are loose, as if the boundary between waking and dreaming has grown thin. Above them, the sky is astonishing. Stars are not scattered here, they are woven. Thick bands of pale light cross the darkness in swirls and arcs, the great river of the Milky Way, spilling from one edge of the world to the other. Between its countless tiny fires are gaps, irregular pools of deeper black, places where, even in the midst of so many stars, there is an absence. The opening question is soft, like a breath spoken into cool air. What does it mean to name not only the stars, but the dark spaces between them? Whispers tell us that in forgotten centuries, long before charts were inked on paper and constellations were mapped as hunters and lions and queens, there were people who lay beneath this sky night after night and learned a different kind of reading. They did not join the points of light into figures. They joined the shadows. An elder lifts a hand from the ground and raises it slowly, the movement unhurried, as if not to startle the night. Fingers trace an outline against the sky, not around the stars, but around the voids between them. Here, the gesture says, though no words are spoken aloud, is the head of the serpent. The elder follows a shape cut from darkness itself, a long curve where the stars thin out, framed by brighter clusters on either side. To untrained eyes, it is only a gap. To those who have slept under this sky since childhood, it is a creature, coiled and watchful. Here, a second curve of absence extends from the first, like a river branching, or a path winding. Here is the long road. A third patch of blackness forms the broad back of a bird, its wings outstretched not in stars but in the space where stars fall away. The constellations they know are woven from void and interval, from what is missing rather than from what is present. The names they whisper are not attached to bright points, but to great, shadowy forms that rise and drift among the star clouds. Beneath the silence of the plain, a new idea begins to glow, that absence can be its own kind of presence. We float gently above this camp, rising like a slow exhale. From this height, the land spreads out in all directions, a dark, sleeping ocean of earth. The campfire is a tiny ember now, a single point of red tucked against the vastness below. The sky arches around us like a dome of polished stone, and within that dome, the familiar patterns of the darkness become clearer. A river of black runs through the whitening haze of the Milky Way, like ink poured into milk. A yawning hollow, darker than the rest, rests between two great star swarms, its outline like the back of a giant beast settled to sleep. Thin canals of emptiness branch out like the veins of a leaf. The elders have names for these shapes, not names we would recognize, not Greek heroes or later saints, but words from a language carved by wind and carried by sand, names that taste of ash and grass, of long journeys and old stories told many times. They speak of rivers that exist only in the sky, yet guide the walking paths below. They tell of serpents, whose heads are always turned toward the season of storms, of birds, whose dark bodies stretch across the time of migration. In their sky lore, the dark is not background, it is story. To understand it is to walk in step with both seen and hidden worlds. In this worldview, navigation is not done only by following bright points, it is done by the outline of absence. We drift down again to stand beside a group of travelers preparing to move before dawn. Their fire has been allowed to die entirely, the embers buried in sand. They rely on starlight now, not for comfort, but for direction. One points upward and draws a line in the air along the edge of a particular patch of darkness, where the star-crowded river bends away. When the dark river stands overhead, they murmur, and the serpent's back touches the horizon there, we walk toward the long water. That long water may be a distant oasis, a seasonal riverbed, a known valley where grass will be thick when the sun returns. These are not metaphors to them. They are instructions. The gap itself becomes a compass. If a traveler knows that a certain road underfoot mirrors a certain road of blackness overhead, they can keep their path even when clouds smear the stars into faint, indistinct light. If they have memorized the angles between dark beasts and dark rivers in the sky, they can find their way when the bright constellations we know are hidden or too low to see. They navigate by intervals, by void, by the shapes of what is not. It is said that when the elders first taught this sky lore, they did not begin with explanations, they began with stories. They spoke of a time when the heavens were too bright, too crowded with light, and the souls of the dead had nowhere to rest. So the greatest of them, the first wanderer, reached up and scooped away handfuls of stars, leaving pockets of shade where spirits could sleep and dream. They told of a serpent who refused to shine, who curled itself in protest among the star rivers, declaring that not all things that matter must be seen. In its honor, the people learned to look where others did not, to value the quiet spaces between burning points. They whispered of hidden paths that could only be found by those who could see the outline of a road in what others called emptiness. These tales are not meant to be historically true. They are meant to turn the mind in a particular direction, to tilt the gaze. Beneath the silence, the listeners begin to understand. The sky is not only the sum of its lights, it is also the sum of its shadows. We move gently through time, watching how this way of seeing shapes a people's relationship with the world. During the day, they read tracks in sand and the pattern of dry grass, interpreting what is missing as much as what is present. A broken line of prints, a sudden gap in a herd's path, the absence of birds in a place where they should be. These empty spaces tell as much as any clear mark. At night, they lift this habit of reading into the heavens. Dark patches between stars become like quiet footprints of great celestial beings. The open spaces are rooms in a house of sky where unseen spirits move. To know their positions and movements is to know when to set out and when to stay, when to trust a journey and when to wait. In this way, the heavens become a mirror of unseen stories and secret companions. They do not imagine the sky as something they can control. There are no attempts here to bind the stars into strict equations or to use their movements to predict the rise and fall of kings. Instead, there is a listening, a long, patient listening to the spaces between the stars' voices. The emotional journey, for us watching, moves gently from curiosity to a deep, quiet wonder. We realize that while others have tried to defy the stars by mastering their patterns, by turning them into tools and schedules and signs of power, these night watchers have chosen another kind of defiance. They have refused to be guided only by what shines. They have chosen to read an entirely different script. As the chapter deepens, we find ourselves once more lying beside the fading campfire, sharing the gaze of those who named the dark. The embers are smaller now, their glow almost gone. The earth underneath feels cool and solid. The sky above has grown, if possible, even more immense. Our eyes, given time to adjust, see more, not more light, but more subtle gradations of darkness. The gaps between star clusters seem to thicken, becoming almost tangible. Where once we saw only scattered points, now we begin to perceive the silhouettes that the elders spoke of. A long, arched absence suggests the curve of a sleeping animal, A wide, empty mouth between bright clusters looks like a gateway, a void door leading somewhere we cannot name. The people around us breathe slowly, evenly. One by one, their eyes close, but their bodies remain turned toward the sky, as if some part of them continues to read even in sleep. Their dreams, we imagine, are threaded with the same shapes they have traced so many times with waking hands. Rivers of void, serpents of shadow, paths of darkness winding across a burning field of stars. Beneath the silence, the dark between stars feels less like nothingness and more like presence, a soft, sacred veil stretched across the universe. Time loosens again. We drift away from this ancient camp and forward into other ages. Cities rise on distant horizons. Stone towers climb into the air, their windows lit with lamps and later with harsher lights. Scrolls are written and rewritten. New constellations are named, bright ones, dotted lines connecting stars into hunters and scales and ships. Under such skies, the old shapes dim, not because they are gone, but because fewer eyes are looking for them. Stories born from bright constellations travel far, carried by books and ships and charters. Meanwhile, the tales of dark constellations remain close to the ground, whispered in languages that may never be written down, carried in songs that require a particular darkness to make sense. Where memory fades, the sky remains the same. The dark spaces are still there, unclaimed by most, but ready to be seen again by anyone willing to stand outside the reach of city lights, to lie down on their back, and to let their eyes linger on what others do not name. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen. We return, at last, to the solitary night with which we began. The campfire is now only a suggestion, a circle of cold stones, faintly outlined. The people have become a ring of sleeping forms, their faces turned upward in trust. The land around them is vast and quiet, the kind of silence that feels older than any word. Above, the dark shapes between constellations grow more pronounced. The great river of stars seems to flow around invisible islands, huge and slow-moving. The serpent's head cuts a familiar silhouette across the Milky Way. An enormous bird spreads its wings in shadow, guarding some region of the sky like a watchful ancestor. They do not move quickly. They drift across the night in the same way they have drifted across years, and lives and histories, indifferent to our small concerns yet strangely protective. It is easy, in such a moment, to imagine them as guardians of some quiet balance between what can be known and what must remain mystery. Perhaps defying the stars does not always mean resisting their power. Perhaps, sometimes, it means choosing to listen differently, refusing to let brightness alone dictate the story, and instead allowing the soft, hidden patterns of the dark to speak. As you drift toward sleep, you may carry with you the image of that open sky, not as a map of only glittering points, but as a tapestry woven equally from light and shadow. Between every pair of stars you have ever noticed lies a space of possibility, a quiet pocket where a forgotten story might rest. Beneath that vast, celestial veil, the people who name the dark between stars close their eyes, trusting that even in absence there is guidance, even in emptiness there is meaning, and the night, wrapped in its oceanic stillness, watches over them and over you until the first faint hint of dawn begins to soften the edges of the world once more.